Welcome, welcome. You're here at Eclipse Wizardry. Today we present to you, what if female Tom Riddle met Harry at age 9 and her Horcrux magic recognized him as her equal. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, Recognition. The summer of 1989 smelled like hot pavement and cut grass and the particular kind of boredom that only exists in perfectly maintained suburban streets where nothing is ever allowed to go wrong. Privet Drive was exactly the sort of place Tomasia Riddle despised on principle. She walked along the pavement with her hands in the pockets of her too large cardigan. The orphanage issued clothing by size approximation, never by fit, and catalogued everything she saw with the systematic attention she gave to all new environments. Neat hedges. Identical doors painted in shades of cream and burgundy. A woman 3 houses down pretending to water her roses while watching Tom walk past. A fat ginger cat asleep on a wall. Cars in driveways. Not a single thing out of place. Which was exactly why the boy sitting on the pavement outside number 4 was so immediately interesting. He was small for his age. Tom recognized the particular shrinkage of a child who hadn't been fed quite enough for quite a long time, because she saw it in the mirror every morning, with dark hair that went in every direction at once and glasses that had been repaired at the bridge with a strip of sellotape. He was sitting cross-legged on the concrete with a stick in his hand, and he was drawing something in the dust along the edge of the gutter. Not doodling. Actually drawing, with the focused intent of someone solving a problem. Tom slowed down. She hadn't meant to stop. She was here for a reason. Mrs. Cole had sent her to post 3 letters at the box on Magnolia Road, which Tom had already done, and she had 30 minutes before she needed to be back at the van that would take them all back to Wool's. She'd been using the extra time to walk the area near the address she'd found in the orphanage's records office, the address connected to a family named Potter who had apparently made a donation to Wool's orphanage in 1981 and then never again. She didn't know yet why that interested her. She just knew that things which stopped abruptly were always worth examining. But the boy in the dust was more immediately interesting than any of that. She stopped walking. He didn't look up. His stick moved in careful strokes. She could see now that he was drawing a map. Streets, she thought. Little squares for houses. He was mapping Privet Drive from memory, and he was doing it accurately, because she'd walked enough of it herself to check. "You've got the Polkiss house wrong," she said. "It's set back further from the road than you've drawn it." The boy looked up. His eyes were green. Very green, the specific shade of new leaves in April, and they were sharp in a way that didn't match the rest of him, the too big clothes, the sellotaped glasses, the general impression of someone the world had been casually careless with. The eyes were not careless. The eyes were paying very close attention. "How do you know which house is the Polkiss house?" he said. "The name's on the post box," Tom said. "I read it when I walked past. Most people don't notice things like that. Most people aren't paying attention." He looked at her for a moment. Not the way adults looked at her, the way Mrs. Cole looked at her, or the other children, with that particular combination of unease and resentment that Tom had learned to read as clearly as a book. This boy looked at her the way she looked at things she found genuinely puzzling and wanted to understand. "You're not from here," he said. "No." "Where are you from?" "An orphanage in London." Something moved through his face, not pity, which she would have hated, but recognition. The kind that happens between people who share a language nobody else speaks. "Oh," he said, and left it there, which was the correct response. Tom came a step closer and looked at the map. It was good. Better than good. He'd used relative scale without being taught to, and he'd marked which houses had dogs by a small symbol she took a moment to decode, and which ones had people who came and went at unusual hours. "Why are you mapping it?" she said. "Know your territory," he said, like it was obvious. "If you know where everything is, nothing can surprise you." Tom considered this. "What's the symbol mean?" she asked, pointing to a small mark on the house at number 4. His house, she was fairly sure, since he was sitting outside it. He hesitated. Just for a second. Dangerous, he said. Tom looked at the house. It was identical to all the others. Cream door. Neat hedge. A car in the drive that was newer and more aggressively clean than the ones on either side. She looked back at the boy. Your house, she said. My aunt and uncle's. But you drew dangerous. Yes, he said, simply, and looked back at his map. Tom sat down on the pavement beside him. She didn't ask permission and he didn't suggest she needed it. She sat with her knees pulled up and looked at the map seriously. You should add exit routes, she said. A map of territory is only useful if you can plan movement. Mark where you can go that they can't follow. He looked at her sideways. Who are you? Tom Riddle. That's a boy's name. It's my name, she said, without heat. She'd had this conversation more times than she could count and she had long since decided it wasn't worth the energy of being annoyed by it. Her name was her name and she had chosen to keep it specifically because the matron at Wool's had first suggested she go by Tom Asia, which was sufficiently frilly and feminine to make Tom want to set something on fire. The boy nodded, accepting this with a practicality she appreciated. Harry Potter, he said. And that was interesting. That was very, very interesting, because she knew that name. It was right there in the donation records, Potter, 1981, a single lump sum and then nothing, and she was already thinking about what that meant, about the coincidence of being here and meeting this specific child, and she had long since stopped believing in coincidences. But she didn't say any of that. Instead she said, hand me the stick. He handed it over without asking why. She leaned forward and corrected the Polkiss house on his map, adjusting the spacing with precise strokes, then added a small line running behind numbers 6 through 12 that she'd noticed was a gap between the fences, easily enough for a child to slip through, impassable for an adult. She handed the stick back. Harry Potter looked at the addition for a moment. How did you know about the gap? I looked. You were only here for a minute. I pay attention, she said, and he gave a small, quick smile, not a polite one, but the specific kind that meant yes, I understand exactly what you mean, and something strange happened. It had never happened before, and Tom didn't have a word for it, which was profoundly irritating because she had a word for nearly everything. She felt, not felt, because feeling was an imprecise instrument she did not entirely trust, she registered something. A pull. Not physical. Somewhere deeper than physical, somewhere she'd been probing carefully for 2 years with small dark experiments she conducted alone in her room at Wool's, the experiments that started after she realized she could do things no one else could do and that if she was going to understand herself she was going to have to go further than anyone had told her was safe. That place. The experiments reached for that place in her. And something in Harry Potter reached for it too. Tom went very still, the way she went still when she was processing something that required all of her attention. Harry didn't notice, or if he did, he left her to it, which was another point in his favor. The sensation wasn't threatening. That was the confusing part. Everything Tom had encountered in her private experimentation had been, at some level, about power, taking it, using it, protecting herself from losing it. This was something adjacent to power but not identical to it. It felt like recognition. Like two pieces of the same lock. She didn't understand it. She filed it under investigate further and came back to the conversation. What are you drawing the map for? She asked again. Practically. What are you planning to do with it? Harry Potter looked at her with those sharp green eyes. I haven't decided yet, he said. But I like knowing I could do something if I wanted to. Tom understood that completely. It was, in fact, the principle her entire life was organized around. What kind of things can you do? She said. He went a bit careful. She recognized the wariness. It was the wariness of someone who had done something they couldn't explain and been punished for it, or laughed at, or told they were lying. She felt a cold, specific anger on his behalf that surprised her with its immediacy. "Things happen," Harry said, carefully. "Around me. When I want them to, or when I'm upset, or when," he stopped. "You'll think I'm mental." "I won't," Tom said. "You don't know that." "I grew up in an orphanage," Tom said. "I know how to tell the difference between someone who's lying and someone who's telling the truth and expecting to be disbelieved. You're the second kind." She paused. "Also, I can do things too." The carefulness in his face cracked open a little. "What kind of things?" "Show me yours first," Tom said, "and I'll show you mine." Harry Potter looked at her for a long, considering moment. Then he looked at the house across the road, the Polkis house, set back further from the road, with a front garden of uninspired rose bushes, and he looked at the largest rose bush in the center. He just looked at it, with a particular focused attention that Tom recognized because she used it herself, and one of the roses detached cleanly from its stem and floated, wobbling slightly, across the road and settled into the dust between them. Tom looked at the rose. She picked it up. She turned it over in her fingers. A perfect cut, as clean as if someone had used scissors. The stem was undamaged. The rose was simply free, relocated by an act of will, and it smelled very strongly of summer. "How long have you been able to do that?" she said. "Always," Harry said. "But better lately." He looked at her. "Your turn." Tom thought about what to show him. She could do quite a lot of things by now. She'd been systematically cataloging and expanding her abilities since she was 7, and she had a range that she suspected was substantially beyond what most children with her gift were capable of. She could have moved the rose herself, easily. She could do considerably more than that. She decided to be honest with him, which was unusual. She was almost never honest with people about her full capabilities. But there was something about the way he'd shown her his thing without prevarication or performance that made her want to match it. She looked at the sellotape on his glasses. The bridge had clearly been broken and repaired multiple times. There were old marks where tape had been removed and reapplied. Tom reached out and pressed 2 fingers to the break. She felt the magic settle through her like breathing, clean and automatic, and the crack in the plastic knit back together. Not quite invisible but close, a thin white line where the break had been, the material reknit at a molecular level. Harry took off his glasses and looked at them. He ran a thumb over the bridge. His expression was, she catalogued it, something between amazed and careful, like he was waiting for the cost of the thing. "That's different from what I do," he said. "Yes. What I can do is more precise than what you can do. What you can do is more instinctive." She tilted her head. "Can you do precise things if you try?" He thought about it. Then he looked at a small pebble on the pavement and very carefully, with visible effort, lifted it exactly 2 inches off the ground and held it there, trembling slightly, for 5 seconds before it dropped. "I have to concentrate harder for small things," he said. "Big things are easier." "That's backwards from how it usually works," Tom said. "How do you know how it usually works?" "I've been researching." She pulled her knees in closer. "There are books. Not in normal libraries, I had to find them, it took me nearly a year, but there's a bookshop in Charing Cross Road with a back section behind a door that's easy to miss if you're not looking. The books there aren't normal books." She watched his face. "You didn't know about the books." "I didn't know about any of it," he said. "I just knew I could do things." "We're witches," Tom said. "Or, you're a wizard. There's a whole separate world. Schools, governments, history going back thousands of years." She saw his eyes go wide and pressed on before he could interrupt. "I found out when I was 7. I've been learning everything I can since then." Harry Potter was quiet for a long moment. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decode, something layered, something with multiple components running in parallel. "And you just walked up to me and told me," he said. You made a rose float across the road, Tom said. It seemed relevant. But how did you know I wouldn't tell someone? She raised an eyebrow. You drew dangerous on your own house. Who exactly were you going to tell? He laughed. It was sudden and short and real, the kind of laugh that escapes before you decide to let it out, and it changed his whole face, lighter, younger, less defended. Tom found herself recording it with the same attention she gave to everything important. What's the school called? He said. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. We'll both get letters when we're 11. 2 more years. Tom paused. Although I've learned enough that I don't particularly need to wait. You've been teaching yourself? Yes. From the books in Charing Cross Road. Those and others. I'm very good at finding things. Harry looked at her steadily. Why are you telling me all of this? It was a good question and Tom gave it genuine consideration before she answered, because she disliked giving answers she hadn't thought through. The honest answer was complicated. Part of it was the sensation she'd felt when she sat down, that pulling, resonant feeling she still didn't have a framework for. Part of it was that this boy was the most interesting thing she'd encountered in 9 years of paying careful attention to everything around her. Part of it was that she had been alone with this knowledge for 2 years and it was beginning to feel like carrying a stone she couldn't put down and couldn't share and couldn't stop feeling the weight of. She didn't say any of that. What she said was, because you'd have found out in 2 years anyway, and you seem like someone who'd rather have 2 extra years. Harry Potter smiled at her again, slower this time, and more serious. Yeah, he said. I would. They sat on the pavement outside number 4 Privet Drive for another hour and a half. Tom missed the van back to London. She sat in the police station waiting for Mrs. Cole to come and collect her at 10 o'clock that night and she thought about everything they'd talked about and she felt, for the first time in a very long time, that something had genuinely surprised her. She was not certain she hated it. Mrs. Cole was furious, which was expected, and Tom weathered it with the equanimity she brought to most things, a surface of polite contrition and a complete internal absence of remorse. She sat in the back of the car and listened to Mrs. Cole explain that this was unacceptable behavior, that Tom was old enough to know better, that her privileges would be revoked for a month. Yes, Mrs. Cole, Tom said, at the appropriate intervals. Do you have anything to say for yourself? I lost track of time, Tom said. I'm very sorry. Neither statement was entirely true, but they were what Mrs. Cole wanted to hear, and Tom was efficient. Mrs. Cole made a noise that communicated her dissatisfaction and didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. Tom looked out at the dark London streets scrolling past and thought about Harry Potter. She thought about the map in the dust and the floating rose and the repaired glasses and the word dangerous written on his own home. She thought about the steadiness in his eyes when she'd explained about the wizarding world, not the glazed overwhelm she would have expected from most children, but a kind of careful attention, filing things away, asking precise questions, occasionally correcting his mental model with a quickness that she found genuinely impressive. She thought about the pull. Back in her room at Wool's, a small room she'd secured for herself 3 years ago by the simple expedient of making the previous occupant so uncomfortable that he'd requested a transfer to the dormitory, she sat at her desk and opened the notebook she kept her research in. She used a cipher of her own invention, partly for security and partly because the habit of encoding information had become second nature. She turned to a fresh page and wrote, in cipher, soul resonance. Look this up. She didn't have a better term for it. She'd been exploring, carefully and in total secrecy, the magic that existed at the edges of living, the stuff that the normal books in the back of Flourish and Blots didn't touch, the darker theory, the things whispered about in the heaviest volumes she'd tracked down from a cellar in Knockturn Alley who'd been too greedy to ask what a 9-year-old wanted with advanced soul magic theory. The concept she'd been developing, the concept she hadn't told anyone about because it was the kind of concept you kept absolutely private, was about permanence. About persistence. About not being at the mercy of death the way everyone else was. The preliminary theory, as she understood it at 9, with 2 years of self-directed research, was that the soul could be, not split, exactly, because the common texts were vague and often sensationalist about the details, but anchored. Tied to objects outside the body. Made durable. She hadn't done anything yet. She was nowhere near doing anything yet. She was still in the theoretical stage and she was thorough enough to stay there until she understood it properly. But the pull she'd felt, that resonance, was connected to this work. She was almost certain of it. As if Harry Potter's existence had brushed up against the thing she was building in herself and recognized it. Or recognized its potential. She sat with her pen over the notebook for a long time. What she finally wrote was, "He is not an obstacle. He might be the only thing interesting enough to be worth being careful about." She looked at this for a moment. Then she added, "Visit again Thursday." Thursday was difficult to arrange, but Tom arranged it, because she arranged most things she decided to do. She told Mrs. Cole she was going to the library, which was true in spirit if not in precise geography. She took the bus to Little Whinging, which cost her almost the entire small allowance she received and which she didn't mind at all. Harry was in the back garden. She looked over the fence, a low thing, easy to see over, and he was sitting with a book. An actual book, which pleased her. She'd wondered whether he read. He was reading with the same concentrated attention he'd given his map, and he didn't notice her for nearly a minute, which was long enough for her to read the title over his shoulder. Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, by Charles Mackay. 1841, Tom revised her estimate of him upward significantly. "That book is about how people convince themselves that impossible things are true," she said. Harry looked up without startling. He'd heard her coming. "I know," he said. "I'm reading the chapter on the Crusades." He paused. "Why are you here?" "I said I'd come back Thursday." "You didn't say you'd come back Thursday." "I thought it was implied." He considered this. "My aunt's inside," he said. "She'll see you if she looks out the kitchen window." "Will that be a problem?" "For you, no. For me, probably yes." He stood up, tucking the Mackay under his arm. "There's a park. 15 minutes walk. We can go there." Tom had already known about the park. She'd mapped the area more thoroughly in the days since her first visit, but she didn't mention this. She met him at the side gate and they walked to the park together and sat on the swings, which neither of them actually swung on. Harry opened the Mackay again to his page. Tom took out her notebook. "What are you writing?" Harry said. "Research notes." "On what?" She looked at him. The honest pull toward telling him was there again, that same confusing urge to share information she would normally guard absolutely. She compromised. "Magic theory," she said. "Advanced theory. The kind they apparently don't teach at schools." "How do you know they don't teach it?" "Because the texts that describe it are kept in places that aren't easy to find, and they describe it as dangerous. Things that are actually dangerous don't get put on school curricula." Harry closed the Mackay on his finger. "What kind of dangerous?" "The kind that has to do with what the soul is made of and what you can do with it," Tom said, and watched his face. He didn't flinch. He sat with it for a moment, and then he said, "What is the soul made of?" "That," Tom said, "is exactly the right question, and I haven't found a satisfactory answer yet." "What answers have you found?" And so she told him. Not everything. She held back the specific theory about anchoring, about permanence, because that was still too private, too essential to the architecture of her own survival, to share yet. But she told him the framework, that magic was alive in ways most wizards didn't think about, that it had properties that the mainstream wizarding world had deliberately moved away from studying because those properties were frightening, that the old texts described dimensions of magical ability that the school system had been quietly discouraging for about a century. Harry listened the way he did everything, completely. No interruptions except clarifying questions, no performative reactions, just genuine, full attention. Why would they discourage people from learning it, he said, when she'd wound down. Control, Tom said immediately. A population that doesn't know the full extent of what it can do is a population that depends on its institutions to define what's possible. That's very cynical for a 9-year-old. It's very accurate for a 9-year-old. Harry smiled that quick, real smile. Yeah, he said. Probably. He looked at the Mackay cover. That's kind of what this is about, actually. The whole book. People believing things because the people in charge of the story want them to believe it. I know, Tom said. I read it at 7. Of course you did. But he was grinning now, and there was no edge to it. It was just of course you did, Tom Riddle said with the specific warmth of someone who finds another person's peculiarities genuinely likable rather than alienating. Tom registered this and felt that strange resonance again, deeper this time, like a chord being struck. She reached into the outer pocket of her bag and took out the small book she'd brought specifically to give to him. She held it out. He took it without reaching, she had to put it in his hand directly, and looked at the cover. The Theory of Magical Inheritance, by Adalbert Waffling. Published 1952, a second edition she'd found in the back of Flourish and Blots with a cracked spine and somebody else's margin notes. Read the chapter on Seers first, she said. Then the chapter on wild magic, which is what we have, apparently, it's the technical term for magic that manifests without training. Then come back and tell me what you think. Harry turned the book over in his hands. Why this one? Because it explains what we are, at least in terms the mainstream will accept. It'll give you a framework for the rest. She paused. The rest will be better books. Harder ones. But this is a place to start. He looked at her with those precise green eyes. You're teaching me, he said. I'm giving you a book. That's the same thing, the way you do it. Tom didn't answer this, because she was fairly certain he was right and she wasn't sure how she felt about that. She had never taught anyone anything, by choice. She'd always considered other people's ignorance to be tactically useful. The urge to hand Harry Potter books and watch him think through them was therefore new and somewhat bewildering. She would examine it later. For now, she said, let me see your glasses, and he took them off again and she held them and felt along the repaired bridge she'd fixed last time and found a hairline crack beginning in the right arm, stress fractures, from the sellotape being applied and removed, probably, and she fixed that too. Then she looked at the lens on the left side and found the prescription was uneven, the left correcting for a different focal problem than the right, and she thought about how to address that and felt carefully along the glass and nudged it, a delicate adjustment, the kind of magic that required more precision than power, until the refractive index was closer to matching. Harry put them back on and blinked. Everything's sharper, he said. Your left lens was wrong. It's not perfect, I'd need proper optician tools to do it right, but it's better. He looked at her. Thank you, he said, and it wasn't the automatic social response. It was real. Direct. The specific thank you of someone who means it entirely. Tom said, read the chapter on Seers first, and got up to leave before she could register any more of the unfamiliar feelings this conversation kept producing. She came back the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that, and the Thursday after that. By the fourth visit, Harry had read the Waffling twice and had 17 questions about the chapter on inherited magical traits and 2 complaints about the chapter on wild magic which were, Tom was forced to admit when she heard them, entirely valid complaints about methodological inconsistency in Waffling's research. She hadn't expected him to catch that. She came prepared with better books after that. By the 6th visit, they had established a system. She brought books, he read them and came back with questions she actually had to think to answer. They sat in the park, or sometimes on the front steps of Privet Drive when Harry judged his aunt and uncle were out for long enough, and they talked about magic theory with an urgency and depth that Tom had only ever experienced alone with her own thoughts. She showed him things she could do. He showed her things he could do. His power was extraordinary, she'd known it from the first moment, that resonance, but it was raw in a way that fascinated her, like a fire that hadn't been given a shape yet. His instincts were uncanny. He did things correctly without knowing why, while she understood the why precisely and had to fight to match his ease. They were different engines producing the same force, and Tom found this more interesting than she'd found anything in her life. On the 7th visit, in mid-August, sitting in the park with a book on elemental magical theory between them, Harry said, "You know what I haven't asked you yet?" "What?" "Why you were in Little Whinging in the first place." Tom had been waiting for this. She'd wondered how long it would take him. She'd actually laid a small private bet with herself of 6 visits, and she'd been right to the visit. "There was a donation to my orphanage," she said. "In 1981. From a family named Potter. I found the records when I was 7 and I've been curious about it since." Harry was quiet. The book was open between them but neither of them was looking at it. "Potter," he said. "Yes. My parents died in 1981. "I know," Tom said. "In October 1981. I found that too, once I started looking. The records say they died in a car accident but the wizarding texts say something very different." Harry looked at her. There was something complicated moving behind his eyes, the kind of complicated that comes from a truth you've suspected for a long time but haven't wanted to make definite by saying out loud. "What do the wizarding texts say?" "They say you stopped a dark wizard named Voldemort," Tom said carefully, watching his face. "That he killed your parents and tried to kill you and that something went wrong with his killing curse and he was destroyed. Or mostly destroyed. The texts are unclear on the details." She paused. "They call you the boy who lived. There are books about it. Children's picture books." Harry stared at her. The complicated thing behind his eyes resolved into something she could read more clearly, not shock, because he was not someone who went into shock easily, but the particular expression of someone recalibrating every single thing they thought they knew about their own life at once. "Picture books," he said. "Yes. About me. About a baby version of you, technically. Who defeated a dark wizard." Harry took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He put them back on. He looked at the park, the empty swings, the afternoon light going gold across the grass, a dog running after a ball in the far corner. He was doing the thing she'd noticed he did when he needed to process something, going very still and quiet in a way that looked like absence but was actually the opposite. He was more present than most people were when they were shouting. "My scar," he said eventually. "The one on your forehead." "Yes. The texts say that's where the curse hit." "I always knew there was something about the scar," he said. "Not just that it's weird. It does things, sometimes. Gets warm. Or it pulls. Toward things." Tom went still. "Pulls," she said. "Yeah. Like, a direction. Like there's something it's oriented toward." He touched the lightning bolt scar absently, through his fringe. "Is that normal?" "No," Tom said. "That is extremely not normal." She said it calmly because she was calm, she was always calm, it was one of her more useful qualities, but underneath the calm she was processing something that felt, for the first time in 2 years of theory and research, like a piece of the puzzle she hadn't known was missing sliding into place with a small, definitive click. Soul resonance, she'd written, 2 months ago, the night of their first meeting. She'd been circling it since then, coming at it from different angles, not quite arriving at a conclusion. She was closer now. She looked at Harry Potter, the lightning bolt scar barely visible under his fringe, the sharp green eyes waiting patiently for her to finish thinking, the waffling book open on the bench between them, and she thought, something of Voldemort is in that scar, and something of me is in whatever I'm building, and both of those things reached for each other the moment we sat down on the pavement. She didn't say any of this. She wasn't ready to say it, because she didn't yet understand it well enough to speak it aloud, and she never said things aloud before she understood them well enough to defend them. What she said was, "Your scar is connected to whatever happened that night. I don't know how, yet. But I'm going to find out." "Okay," Harry said, like she'd offered to look up a bus timetable. "You're not alarmed." "Should I be?" Tom considered this. Most people would be. "Most people aren't paying attention," Harry said, and gave her back her own words with a small, precise smile. Tom looked at him for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and took out the next book, a slender, old volume, its cover worn to illegibility, that she'd obtained from the Nocturne Alley cellar at significant personal cost, and held it out to him. He took it. He looked at the title page, where the words were still readable, on the persistence of magical essence and the properties of involuntary transference. By an author who had given only initials. He looked up at her. "This is from the other library, isn't it?" he said. "Not really a question. The ones you said weren't normal books." "Yes. You said those were dangerous." "They are," Tom said. "But relevant." Harry held the book for a moment. Then he tucked it under his arm next to the Mackay. He'd brought the Mackay again, as if he were still thinking about it, and he looked at her with an expression she was only just beginning to learn to read. "Tom," he said. "What?" "You came to this neighborhood looking into a donation from my family and found me on the pavement." "Yes." "And then you came back." "Yes." 7 times. "Yes." "And you've given me 6 books and you're working on figuring out what my scar is connected to and you've fixed my glasses twice." He paused. "I'm not saying any of this is bad. I'm just saying, you do know that's a very strange thing to do, right? For someone who didn't know me before?" Tom was quiet for a moment. The afternoon light was doing something golden and long across the park grass. A child on a bicycle wobbled past on the path, ringing the bell for no apparent reason. The dog in the far corner had gotten its ball back and was now holding it triumphantly while its owner reached futilely for it. "Your magic," Tom said finally, "reached for something in me when we met. Not figuratively. Actually. Something in the work I've been doing, the theory, the deep magic, it responded to you like nothing has ever responded to anything before." She kept her voice even and factual because that was how she handled things she didn't fully understand yet. "I don't know what it means yet. But I intend to understand it. And until you understand it, you're going to keep coming back," Harry said. "Yes." "And bringing books." "Yes." He nodded slowly. The careful, multi-component expression was back, the one she was beginning to decode as several simultaneous things that are not simple enough to put in one word. "All right," he said. "All right?" "I mean, yeah." He shrugged, but it was a deliberate shrug, the kind that covers something rather than expressing nothing. "I don't know why your magic reached for mine either. But mine reached back. I noticed it too." He touched the spine of the book she'd given him. "And you're the only person I've ever met who talks to me like I'm actually going to understand what you're saying." Tom processed this. It was, she thought, the most direct and honest thing either of them had said to the other, which made it significant. She kept her voice neutral when she said, "You generally do understand what I'm saying." "I know," Harry said. "That's my point." They sat in the park until the light went completely gold and then pink and then the first deep blue of evening, and Tom missed the last direct bus back to London and had to take 2 changes instead, arriving back at Wolves at nearly 9 o'clock, and Mrs. Cole was furious again. Tom sat through the reprimand and said yes, Mrs. Cole at the intervals, and felt the weight of the book she'd kept back, her own copy of Persistence of Magical Essence, the one she'd copied by hand into her cipher notebook because she'd only had the original for a week before the Nocturne Alley seller had demanded it back, in her bag like an anchor. She was thinking about the chapter she'd read and reread and copied out and thought about from every angle she could reach, the chapter about fragments. About the ways that magical essence, under conditions of extreme emotional violence, could splinter, transfer, attach to the nearest available vessel. She was thinking about Voldemort's killing curse hitting a baby and rebounding. She was thinking about the scar that pulled toward things. She was thinking about herself, about the dark work she was planning, the work that was about permanence and survival, the architecture she'd been building in theory and not yet in practice, the concept that the old books called by a name she hadn't let herself say aloud yet. Horcrux. She was thinking about how the resonance she'd felt when she sat down next to Harry Potter on the pavement of Privet Drive felt identical to the resonance she felt in herself when she worked through the theory, when she probed the deep magic, when she pressed her hands against the architecture of her own soul and tested what it could bear. She was thinking that she might be about to understand something enormous. In her room at Wool's, at 9:30 on a Thursday evening in August 1989, Tomasia Riddle opened her cipher notebook and wrote 6 words. She read them back. She thought about them for a long time. She did not cross them out. What she'd written was, "He already carries a piece of someone." And underneath it, after a long pause, "So will I. But mine will be mine." She closed the notebook. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about Harry Potter reading Persistence of Magical Essence in his small dangerous house on Privet Drive, with his repaired glasses and his map in the dust and his floating roses and his careful, complete, extraordinary attention. She thought, "He is the only person I've ever met who I believe could actually understand what I'm about to do." She did not think, should tell him. Not yet. She didn't understand it fully yet. But she thought, for the first time, something she hadn't thought before. She thought, eventually, I will. Chapter 2, Architecture. The last week of August arrived with a heat wave that turned Little Whinging into a slow-baked version of itself, lawns going yellow, cars too hot to touch, the particular suburban misery of neighbors trying to maintain dignity while visibly melting. Harry didn't mind. He'd spent most of the summer in the back garden, which the Dursleys largely ignored as long as he kept the weeds pulled and the edges trimmed, and he'd been reading. Tom had given him 9 books by now. The 9th was the hardest one, Persistence of Magical Essence, with its cramped pre-modern type and its habit of switching without warning between Latin and English, and Harry was on his 3rd pass through it, lying on his stomach in the garden with the book propped against a flower pot, when he felt the particular warm pressure at the edge of his awareness that he'd started associating with Tom arriving nearby. He didn't know why he could feel her approach. He'd stopped questioning it after the 3rd time because it was consistent and reliable and therefore useful, and Harry was pragmatic about things that were consistent and reliable and useful. He got up, tucked the book under his arm, checked that his aunt's car was still gone from the drive, and went to the side gate. Tom was at the end of the road, walking with her hands in her cardigan pockets and her eyes already cataloguing everything, which was just how she walked. She was wearing the same cardigan she always wore. The orphanage had a rotation of 4, and this one was gray, and approximately 2 sizes too large, and she was carrying her bag over one shoulder, and she looked, Harry thought, like someone who was very pleased about something they were being careful not to look pleased about. "What did you find?" he said, when she was close enough. She stopped. "I haven't said anything yet." "You've got the face." "I don't have a face." "You've got the face you get when you found something important," Harry said. "It's the same as your normal face except your eyes are doing something different." Tom looked at him with an expression that he'd learned to translate as "I am filing this observation away as data about how readable I apparently am, which I will address." She fell into step beside him as he moved back through the side gate and into the garden. "The Nocturne Alley cellar," she said, sitting down on the low garden wall without being invited. He had something new. Or not new, old. Very old. I had to negotiate for it. "What did you give him?" "Information he wanted about a property dispute in the wizarding world that I happened to have researched." She pulled a book from her bag and held it up. It was very small and looked very ancient, the cover was dark leather, the title barely legible, and Harry could see immediately that it was handwritten, every page, not printed. "It's a journal," Tom said. Written by someone called Hepzibah Smith, who died in 1946. She was a collector. She had 2 items that I've been trying to trace for some time. Why were you tracing them? Because they're connected to the family line of Salazar Slytherin, Tom said, and said it with the particular flatness she used for things that mattered enormously to her, and I have reason to believe I'm a descendant of that line. Harry sat down cross-legged on the grass in front of the wall. He'd learned not to interrupt when she was unspooling something. She did it in a particular order, and derailing the order annoyed her and made her start over from the beginning. Okay, he said. Slytherin was one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts. He was known for Parseltongue, the ability to speak to snakes. It's hereditary. It passes through bloodlines. She paused. I can speak to snakes. Harry looked at her. Show me. She looked at the garden. Harry followed her gaze to the small garden snake that had been living under the flower pot for most of the summer. He'd left it alone because it ate slugs, which kept the garden better than anything else he tried, and because he liked it. Tom looked at it and said something that was not English and was not any language Harry had ever heard, a soft, continuous, almost musical hissing that his ears tried to parse as words and couldn't quite, like listening to someone speak from the other side of a wall. The snake lifted its head and looked at Tom with what Harry could only describe as intelligent attention. It hissed something back. Tom hissed again. The snake considered this and then turned and slid back under the flower pot with an air of having completed a satisfying conversation. What did it say? Harry said. It said the garden is adequate and that the large pink human who comes outside sometimes smells wrong, Tom said. I told it the large pink human wasn't going to bother it. It seemed satisfied. The large pink human is my uncle. I gathered. Harry looked at the flower pot for a moment. What does it feel like? Speaking it? Natural, Tom said. Like speaking any language feels natural when it's your first language. There's no translation happening, I just understand it. She looked at him. Can you do it? I don't know, Harry said, which was honest. He looked at the flower pot. He tried to think in the direction of the snake, not words, exactly, but something like intent, like attention, like I mean no harm, I'm curious, hello. The snake's head reappeared from under the flower pot. Harry blinked. He tried again, hello, I'm Harry, I fixed the wall you live under, and felt something strange happen in his throat, a vibration that wasn't quite speech. Tom made a sharp sound. Not quite a word. He looked at her. Her expression was the most unguarded he'd ever seen it. Her eyes were wide and she was staring at him with something that might, on a different face, have been called astonishment. You just spoke Parseltongue, she said. Did I? You said, approximately, I am the gardener, I fixed your wall. The grammar was wrong but the snake understood you. She was still staring. Harry Potter, Parseltongue is a hereditary ability that runs in the bloodline of Salazar Slytherin. You are not, as far as I know, a descendant of Slytherin. No, Harry agreed. So the fact that you can do it means something else gave it to you. She said this slowly, working through it in real time in a way she usually did privately. The working through was visible on her face for about 3 seconds and then it wasn't, locked back down into composure. The scar, she said. The scar. What was Voldemort, if not the last descendant of Salazar Slytherin, Tom said, half to herself. The ability would have transferred. If essence transferred, if a fragment transferred, the abilities would come with it. She looked at Harry with an expression he'd begun to think of as her solving something face, focused and almost cold in its intensity, stripped of everything except thought. You have his ability. Because part of him is in you. The garden was quiet. The snake had retreated again. Somewhere over the fence, a lawnmower started up. That's a very strange thing to be, Harry said. Yes. Does it bother you? That I've got, that there's something of him in me? Tom tilted her head. Should it? I don't know. Most people would probably think so. I'm not most people, Tom said. And it doesn't change what you are. It's an addition, not a replacement. She paused. Also, Voldemort was doing something that I understand and have researched extensively, and his methods were crude. Catastrophic, ultimately, by design flaw. What transferred to you was an accident. What I plan to do will not be accidental. Harry looked at her for a moment. They'd been building toward this conversation for several weeks, circling it, approaching from different angles, and he'd been waiting for her to arrive at the place where she said the actual thing rather than the theory around it. You're going to make a Horcrux, he said. Tom's expression did something very fast and complicated, and then settled. You read that far in the journal, she said. Not a question. I read the whole book, Tom. I always read the whole book. She looked at him. He looked back at her. It was, Harry thought, the particular kind of standoff that only happens between two people who are both too honest with each other to pretend the conversation isn't happening. Yes, Tom said. That's what I'm researching. That's the theory. The theory involves murdering someone, Harry said. Flat, factual, the way she talked when she was being accurate rather than careful. The theory involves a magical act that requires an act of murder, yes. She met his eyes steadily. I haven't done it. I'm not about to do it. I'm 9 years old and I'm still in the theoretical stage and I haven't even begun to work out the full implications of, I know, Harry said. She stopped. I'm not accusing you, he said. I know the difference between researching something and doing something. I'm telling you I read the whole book. So we don't have to pretend we're still in the part of the conversation where that isn't on the table. Tom looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The lawnmower over the fence changed pitch. A car went past on the road. She said, You're not afraid of it. Of you doing it eventually? I don't know. Maybe. He picked up a grass stem and turned it in his fingers. I don't want you to do it wrong. The way Voldemort did. I told you, my methods won't be, Tom. You have a fragment of someone else's soul in the object you're most excited about researching. He looked at her steadily. You're designing a system of personal persistence. And right now the most important anchor in your external environment, the thing your magic keeps reaching for, is another person who already has a soul fragment in him that isn't his. He let the grass stem go. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying be careful about the architecture. Because the architecture you're building is already touching mine. Tom was silent. The lawnmower stopped. The garden went very quiet. You've been thinking about this, she said finally. Since you gave me the waffling book, Harry said. Since the chapter on seers. It describes what I do, the instinct, the knowing things before they happen, the sensitivity to magical presence, as a trait that develops in response to contact with an extraordinarily powerful external magical force. An imprint. He looked at his hands. The scar was the imprint. Voldemort tried to kill me and instead he wrote himself on me, I think. And the things he was, I became capable of too. He paused. So when you walked up to me on the pavement, I didn't just notice you. I noticed the magic you're building in yourself. The deep architecture. It felt like the scar recognizing something. Because the Horcrux theory and the soul fragment theory are the same magic, Tom said, almost to herself. They're two expressions of the same metaphysical principle. Of course it recognized, she stopped. Her eyes came up to his face. Harry. Yeah. If my theory is correct, if the resonance we keep experiencing is the incomplete Horcrux architecture in me reaching toward the soul fragment in your scar, she said it carefully, like she was picking her way across uncertain ground. Then what happens to that resonance if I complete the work? If I actually anchor something? Harry considered this. I don't know, he said honestly. I think it could go one of two ways. Either it gets stronger because you've made the architecture permanent and stable. Or it breaks because you've committed the magic to a different anchor. I don't want it to break, Tom said. She said it in the same flat, factual tone she used for everything, but it was one of the most direct things she had ever said to him, and Harry recognized it as such. Then let me help you with the architecture, he said. Tom stared at him. You want to help me design a Horcrux? I want to help you not accidentally do something irreversible by yourself, with books from Nocturne Alley, when you're 9 years old, Harry said. Yes. That's what I want to do. He met her eyes. And also, yes, I find the theory interesting and I want to understand how it works, and I think 2 people working on it will catch more errors than 1 person working alone. All of those things are true simultaneously. Tom looked at him for a very long time. The specific kind of looking she did when she was cataloging, analyzing, reaching a conclusion she intended to keep. You are, she said finally, the strangest person I have ever met. You grew up in an orphanage, Harry said. Your comparison set is limited. Tom made a sound that in anyone else Harry would have called a laugh, short, sharp, startled out of her. She caught it quickly, but it had happened. She looked away at the garden, composing herself, and Harry looked at the flower pot, giving her the space to do that without being watched. All right, she said. Both of us. On the architecture. She paused. But we don't work on it here. Not in this house. I won't, she stopped again, and Harry heard the thing she wasn't saying. I won't do anything connected to this in the place you wrote, dangerous, on a map. Not here, she finished. There's a library in town, Harry said. Quiet on weekday mornings. My aunt never goes there. Thursday morning, Tom said. 9 o'clock. I'll be there. The library became their place by default. It was small and underfunded and smelled wonderfully of old carpet and the particular dust and paper smell that Harry had always associated with safety, and the librarian, a small, sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Branagh, learned quickly that they wanted the corner table in the back, wanted not to be disturbed, and were more likely than any other patrons to actually return books in the condition they'd borrowed them. She left them alone with a benevolent thoroughness that Harry appreciated enormously. Tom brought books from her bag. Harry brought books he'd been working through. They spread them across the table with the systematic organization Tom brought to everything, and they worked through the architecture. It was, Harry discovered, genuinely fascinating. The theory of Horcruxes, stripped of the moral dimension, examined purely as magical mechanics, was one of the most complex and elegant things he'd encountered in all the material Tom had given him. The soul as a force with physical properties. The relationship between willpower and magic as a kind of engineering. The question of what constituted an adequate anchor and why. The problem with what Voldemort was theoretically doing, Harry said, on their 3rd morning at the library, isn't the concept. It's the number. Tom looked up from Hepzibah Smith's journal. Explain. Every time you split the architecture, you're distributing the load across more nodes, Harry said, sketching something on the notepad between them. Like a bridge. One anchor point, one node, takes all the load. Multiple nodes distribute it. That's good. But if you keep adding nodes, eventually you're not strengthening the structure, you're just making it more fragile. More things that can go wrong. Tom looked at the sketch. Structural redundancy versus structural overextension, she said. Right. Voldemort's plan, 7 Horcruxes, from what the texts suggest, that's not architecture. That's panic. That's someone who doesn't trust the system they've built, so they keep adding to it until the original structure is barely holding. Tom was quiet. She was looking at his sketch with her thinking face, the stripped-down focused one. One, she said. One properly constructed anchor. Sufficient. More than sufficient, if it's well made. Harry tapped the notepad. Quality versus quantity. The question is the object, Tom said. The right vessel. Something with inherent magical resonance. Not just any object. She turned a page in Smith's journal and ran her finger down the text. Hepzibah had 2 items. A locket, Slytherin's locket. And a cup that belonged to Helga Hufflepuff. Both of them are objects with hundreds of years of accumulated magical imprint. They'd be inherently receptive. Where are they now? The locket was sold. I've been tracing it. The cup, she paused. The cup is more complicated. Smith died before she could sell it. Her estate was contested. I have a theory about where it ended up. Where? Gringotts. Harry looked at her. The Wizarding Bank. The only bank that matters, yes. She closed Smith's journal. Which we can't access for another 2 years without drawing attention we don't want to draw. We could, Harry started. No, Tom said. Not yet. There's an order to this. We need more information before we move on the object. She looked at him across the table, the full, direct look she used when she was saying something important. There's something else. Something I've been thinking about since our conversation in your garden. About the architecture touching mine. About what that means, practically, Tom said. If the resonance is real, if it's a genuine metaphysical connection between what I'm building and what you carry, then it has implications for what I should and shouldn't anchor to. She paused. I've been considering the possibility that the right anchor isn't an historical artifact at all. Harry went still. Tom. I'm not saying, good. Because if you're about to say what I think you're about to say, I said I'm not saying it, Tom said, sharp and precise. I'm acknowledging the theoretical coherence of the idea and then setting it aside. Because I'm not, she stopped. Composed herself with the efficiency she always brought to self-correction. The theory doesn't require a living anchor. I've checked. That's not what the architecture is built for. Okay, Harry said. I just wanted you to know that I considered it and dismissed it. I know, Harry said. You just told me. I'm telling you because, she stopped again, and Harry understood she was navigating something she didn't have smooth language for yet, something at the edge of her normal conversational fluency. Tom Riddle was articulate about virtually everything except the things she was still in the process of understanding about herself. Because I want the architecture to be honest, she said finally. If we're both working on it, I want you to know exactly what I've considered and what I've ruled out and why. No hidden variables. Harry looked at her across the notepad with its bridge diagram and its margin calculations. Mrs. Branagh was reshelving something in the stacks nearby, her cart squeaking rhythmically on the carpet. Outside, the summer morning pressed flat and yellow against the library windows. Thank you, he said. Tom looked at him with the multi-layered expression. You keep thanking me for things that don't warrant gratitude. And you keep doing things that warrant it, Harry said. Tom moved the conversation on before he could see what her face did, which he thought was probably deliberate. There's something else I want to cover today, she said, pulling a different book to the top of the stack. Not one he'd seen before, this one had no title on the spine, just a number, 14. This is about defensive magic. The kind that doesn't require a wand. Harry brightened. This was his favorite kind of session, the practical magic, the things they actually tested and refined together. Theory was one thing, and he'd become genuinely good at it, but there was something different about the days when Tom said all right, try this, and they actually tried things, and he got to discover what his hands and his instinct could do when given a real direction. What kind of defensive magic, he said. Shields, Tom said. The literature on nonverbal shielding is thin, but it exists. The principle is that you create a zone of magical resistance around yourself, or around something else, using your own magical field as a barrier. She looked up. You already do a version of this, I think. You just don't know you do. Harry frowned. When? That thing you do when you sleep, she said. The books from the garden, they don't get wet when it rains. You've left them outside by accident and they're always dry. Harry blinked. He hadn't noticed that consciously, but it was true. That's a shield? That's an ambient protective effect, Tom said. Automatic, instinctive, operating below your threshold of awareness. You're maintaining a passive magical field around things you care about. She paused. Including, I suspect, your glasses. I haven't lost them in years, Harry said slowly. I've dropped them dozens of times and they've never broken. Except the old crack. Which was there before you began spending time around me, Tom said. Before something external sparked your magic into higher activity. She turned the book to face him. What I want to teach you today is how to make that passive process active. Conscious and controllable and strong enough to be useful in a genuine threat scenario. You think we'll face genuine threat scenarios? Tom looked at him with her eyebrows slightly raised. Harry. You survived a killing curse as an infant and you live with people who drew dangerous on your own house. I've been researching magic that most of the wizarding world considers deeply illegal, and I do it in secret in an orphanage where several of the adults are actively afraid of me. She let this sit for a moment. Yes. I think we'll face genuine threat scenarios. Harry absorbed this. Fair, he said. They spent the rest of the morning working through the shielding theory, and then they moved outside to a quiet stretch of the nearby park where Tom had identified a back corner behind the bowling green that was thoroughly invisible from the main paths. They practiced there. Tom's shields were precise. She built them with the focused deliberateness she brought to everything, feeling out the edges of her magical field, compressing and shaping it, layering it into something with actual structural integrity. Harry watched her maintain a shield against a thrown pebble and saw it deflect without any visible effort on her part, a subtle shimmer at the last moment that sent the pebble veering sideways. How much concentration does that take? He said. Less than it did 2 weeks ago, Tom said. It becomes automatic with practice. Like breathing. She looked at him. Your turn. Harry held out his hand and Tom threw a pebble at him, not hard, but with intent, and he reached for the passive thing she described, the ambient protectiveness, and tried to grab it and make it active, make it a deliberate wall rather than an unconscious habit. The pebble stopped. Not deflected. Not redirected. It stopped, in midair, about 6 inches from his palm, hanging there for a full second before dropping straight down. Tom looked at the spot where it had stopped. She looked at Harry. That's not what I taught you, she said. I know, Harry said, slightly as surprised as she was. I went for the wrong thing, I think. I wasn't trying to redirect it, I was trying to hold it. That's a stasis effect. That's considerably more advanced than shielding. She picked up the dropped pebble and looked at it. Do it again. He did it again. And again. Tom moved from pebbles to larger stones, to objects thrown faster, to objects thrown from behind him when he was looking away, and found that he stopped them with the same ease whether he could see them coming or not. You're not using your eyes, she said, on the 6th throw. No, Harry agreed. I felt the direction. The same way I feel, he paused. The same way you feel me arrive, Tom said. Yeah. She stood in the afternoon light with the pebble in her hand, looking at him with an expression he'd never quite seen on her before. It was evaluative, yes, she looked evaluative quite often, but underneath the evaluation there was something else, something warm and intent, and Harry looked back at her and felt the resonance between them pulse once, strong and clear, like a bell being struck. You have more instinctive power than anyone I've ever read about, Tom said. And I've read about everyone. You have more technical precision than should be possible for a 9-year-old, Harry said. We're remarkable, Tom said, and said it the way she said everything, factually, without vanity, the specific confidence of someone who has done the analysis and arrived at an accurate conclusion. We are, Harry agreed. Tom sat down on the grass, which she almost never did, because Tom had a complicated relationship with doing anything casually, and pulled her knees up and looked at the park with the unfocused gaze of someone thinking hard about several things at once. Harry sat down beside her. He picked up another pebble and turned it in his fingers. "Tell me about your parents," he said. Tom's gaze shifted. Not to him, to the middle distance, the way she looked when she was deciding something. "My mother died when I was born," she said. "My father," a pause. "My father's name was Thomas Riddle. He was a Muggle. He lived in a village called Little Hangleton. He left my mother before I was born. Do you want to find him?" "No," Tom said. Flat and immediate. He knew about magic, or he found out about it, and he left anyway. Whatever he thought that meant, I don't need to find out. She looked at her hands. "What I want is to know the Slytherin line. That's my real heritage. The Riddle name is an accident. The other half is what I am. And that matters to you? The blood?" Tom looked at him sideways. "Not in the way you're thinking. Not purity or hierarchy or any of that. I don't care about those things." She said it with the contempt she reserved for small ideas. "What I care about is continuity. History. I want to know where I come from because I want to know what I am, which is different." She paused. "Your parents were magical. Both of them. Does that matter to you?" "In the sense that it's part of what I am," Harry said. "Yes. In the sense that it makes me better than someone who isn't, no." Tom nodded. She looked back at the park. "The wizarding world has a significant problem with blood purity politics," she said. "Which I find tedious and counterproductive. The obsession with bloodline as a marker of worth misses the actual interesting thing about bloodlines, which is the traits they carry. The abilities. The magical quirks. Those are worth studying. The hierarchy built on top of them is just power dressed up as meaning." "Who do you want power over?" Harry asked. Not accusatory. Genuinely curious. Tom thought about it for a moment. "No one, specifically," she said. "I want power as a field. A property I carry. Not power over a particular person." She stopped, and Harry had the impression she was touching something she hadn't quite articulated to herself before. "Freedom," she said finally. "The specific freedom of knowing that whatever comes, I can survive it. That nothing can take anything from me that I don't choose to give." She paused. "Death most of all." "That's what the Horcrux is for," Harry said. "Not power over people. Insurance against loss." "Yes," Tom said, and something in her voice was different, quieter. The quality of someone who has just heard their own truth stated accurately for the first time. "I understand that," Harry said. He turned the pebble in his fingers. "I grew up in that house with those people, and the only thing that kept me from being afraid all the time was knowing I could do things they couldn't. Not to hurt them, or not mainly, but because it meant they couldn't take everything. There was always something they couldn't reach." He looked at the pebble. "I understand wanting to make sure that thing is permanent." Tom looked at him, and the warm, intent quality under her evaluation was there again, and she didn't look away this time, and Harry didn't either. "This is the thing I can't explain," Tom said. Why you're," she made a gesture that he read as all of this, the whole situation, the fact that I keep coming back." "I know," Harry said. "It's not just the resonance. I know that too. You're the only person I've ever told the Horcrux theory to," she said. "Not because I don't trust my own judgment about keeping it private, I trust my judgment completely. But because I wanted," she stopped again, hitting the edge of her language. "I wanted someone to know. Not to approve or disapprove. Just to know. I've been carrying this alone for 2 years and Tom," Harry said. What? I know. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, a single precise nod, the kind that meant filed, accepted, not requiring further discussion, and looked back at the park. The afternoon was going long in gold again, the way it did at this time of year, and the bowling green on the other side of the hedge had the soft sound of the game in progress, distant and regular as a heartbeat. 2 years until Hogwarts, Tom said. You're going to walk in there knowing more than most of the teachers, Harry said. Tom said. Not as a correction. As a fact. Harry smiled. He agreed. September came, and with it Harry's return to school, the normal one, the Muggle one, which he attended with the resigned patience of someone doing time, and Tom's return to Wool's orphanage with its autumn rhythms of school uniforms and lousy food and the ongoing background tension of being the person nobody quite wanted to be too near. But they wrote letters. This had taken some negotiation because Owl Post wasn't available to them yet and normal post required care, but Tom had developed a cipher system that would read as ordinary letters to anyone not holding the key, and Harry had learned the cipher by the 3rd week of September and they exchanged 2 letters a week with the reliability of a professional correspondence. Tom wrote about theory, she always wrote about theory, because she thought most efficiently in writing, but she also wrote, increasingly, about small things. The books she was reading. A conversation she'd overheard at Wool's that illustrated something about herd psychology. A stray cat that had taken up residence in the orphanage's back area and that she had been feeding with methodical discretion, noting in passing that it was grey and opinionated. Harry wrote back about Privet Drive, about his cousin Dudley and the small daily negotiations of survival in that house, about the increasingly complex things his instinctive magic was doing without his full understanding of why. He wrote about the book he was reading. He'd worked through all of Tom's lending library and had taken to finding things himself at the Little Whinging Library, which had a surprisingly decent non-fiction section, and he'd found McKay useful enough that he'd gone backward through the same author's bibliography and was now reading memoirs of extraordinary popular delusions in parallel with Tom's copy of a translated text on medieval magical governance that she'd borrowed him before September. In October, Harry's letter arrived with something different at the bottom, after the cipher. A sentence in plain English, no code, which she'd told him to only do in emergencies. It said, Dumbledore came to the school today. He asked my teacher about me. I didn't talk to him. He was watching the whole time though. Tom read this at the desk in her room and sat with it for a long time. She knew the name. She'd known the name since she was 7 and began researching the wizarding world. Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts, widely considered the greatest wizard of the age, and she'd been thinking about what it would mean when he appeared in Harry's life, because she'd known he would. You didn't have a child called the boy who lived and not have the most powerful political figure in your world paying attention to that child. She thought about the timing. Harry was 9. 2 years before the letters. Early for a Hogwarts visit, very early. Which meant Dumbledore wasn't visiting as a headmaster. He was visiting for another reason. She wrote back, in cipher, what did your teacher tell him? Harry's response came 2 days later, not much. She seemed nervous. He was very nice to everyone. He gave me this look when he was leaving, through the window, like he knew I'd been watching the whole time. He smiled. Tom wrote, what kind of smile? Harry, the kind that means he's already thought further ahead than you have. Tom, he's going to Wool's next. She was right. 3 days later, Mrs. Cole called her into the office and told her in her most carefully neutral voice that a very important man was coming to visit and that Tom should wear her good cardigan and be on her best behavior and answer his questions politely. Tom wore the grey cardigan. She sat in the chair across from Albus Dumbledore and studied him with the same systematic attention she gave to all new environments and found him, immediately, to be the most complicated person she had ever encountered. He was old, very old, white-bearded, with half-moon glasses and eyes that were a particularly vivid blue and which were doing something that Tom recognized because she did it herself, watching everything at once, cataloguing, assessing, running multiple tracks of analysis simultaneously behind a surface of warmth and ease. He was very good at it. Better than anyone she'd met. He projected grandmotherly safety and twinkle-eyed benevolence with a proficiency that would have fooled her entirely if she hadn't been specifically looking for the architecture underneath. "Tom," he said warmly. "It's very nice to meet you." "It's nice to meet you too, Professor Dumbledore," Tom said. She smiled. Her best smile, the one she'd practiced, warm and childlike and precisely calibrated to be appealing to adults who wanted to believe she was fine. She held it with the comfort of long use. Dumbledore's eyes did something behind the warmth. Something quickened in there, too fast to be certain of, a flicker of, she searched for the word, recognition. He knows what I am, Tom thought, with a cold clarity that didn't reach her expression. He knows already. Or he suspects. He came here expecting to find something specific and he has found it, and now we are going to have a conversation that is entirely about two people saying things that are not the things they mean. "I've come to tell you about Hogwarts," Dumbledore said, and told her about Hogwarts. Tom listened and asked the right questions and performed her best version of genuine, delighted surprise, and watched Dumbledore's face for information the entire time. What she gathered, in 30 minutes of careful observation, he was kind, genuinely. Not entirely performed. He believed in something he was working toward, something he considered good, and he was willing to do a great deal in its service. He was also watching her with the specific attentiveness of someone who has a prior theory about a subject and is looking for evidence to support it. He didn't mention Harry Potter. Tom didn't mention Harry Potter. At the end, when he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "I hope," he said, warmly, with the specific warmth of someone who has chosen a word carefully, "that you'll find Hogwarts a place to explore your considerable gifts in a guided way." "I look forward to it," Tom said, with her best smile. After he was gone, she sat in the orphanage common room with the gray cat on her lap. It had taken to finding her specifically, which she considered a sound editorial judgment, and she thought about Dumbledore. About the recognition she'd seen in his eyes. About the word guided. About Harry's letter, the kind that means he's already thought further ahead than you have. She wrote that evening in her cipher notebook, not in letter form but in the private shorthand she used when she was thinking out loud on paper, "He's been watching me. Possibly for years." The Wolves' visit wasn't introduction, it was assessment. He wanted to see what I am now so he can plan for what I'll be at 11. She paused. Added, "He doesn't know about Harry and me. If he did, the conversation would have been different. The information asymmetry is ours. Protect it." Then, after another pause, "He's not an enemy yet. He might never be. But he's not an ally and he's not neutral. He's something more complicated than both." She closed the notebook and looked at the cat, who looked back with yellow eyes. "He's going to be interesting," Tom told it. The cat blinked slowly and said nothing. Christmas came and went, difficult at Wolves, as it always was, because Christmas had a specific way of making the particular quality of orphanage life very apparent, and in January a new text arrived from Tom, wrapped in brown paper with the Charing Cross Road bookseller's stamp, addressed to H. Potter, care of the Little Whinging Library, which Tom had suggested after careful consideration as the most neutral drop point. Harry opened it in the back corner of the library, at their table, which he had taken to using alone on the days Tom wasn't there, partly because he felt comfortable there and partly, he privately admitted, because it smelled like her presence, the specific combination of old books and the cedar soap from Wool's that she used because it was the least terrible option available. The book was called A Survey of Accidental Magical Activation in Children with High Innate Potential, published 1943. Inside the front cover, in Tom's precise handwriting, she'd written a note, in cipher, which took him 3 minutes to decode. It said, Chapter 7. Read carefully. Then reread Chapter 4 of waffling with it in mind. I've been thinking about your stasis effect and I have a theory. T. He read Chapter 7. He read it twice. Then he sat back and looked at the ceiling of Little Whinging Library and thought about what Tom had found, and what it meant, and felt something arrive in him, not alarm, not quite excitement, something between both, something with the quality of standing on the edge of a very large height and understanding for the first time how far the drop goes. He wrote back that afternoon, "You think the stasis effect isn't a shield variant? You think it's time?" Tom's response came by the following Thursday, when she arrived at the library door at 9 o'clock exactly with her bag and her 2 books and her gray cardigan, and sat down across from him and said, without preamble, "Not time. Adjacent to time. The manipulation of momentum, kinetic suspension. It looks like time from the outside, but structurally it's more interesting than that." "How do you know?" Harry said. "Because when you stopped the pebble," Tom said, pulling out her notebook, "the pebble's temperature didn't change. If it were a true temporal stasis, thermal energy would also suspend and the pebble would be slightly colder when motion resumed. I measured. It wasn't." Harry stared at her. "You measured the temperature of a pebble I stopped in a park last August." "I had a thermometer," Tom said. "You brought a thermometer to the park." "I brought a thermometer to the park," Tom confirmed, with perfect equanimity, "because I suspected even then that what you were doing was more interesting than standard shielding, and I wanted data." She opened her notebook to a page of careful figures. The pebble's temperature on release was within 0.2 degrees Celsius of its temperature before the stop. That's not stasis. That's suspension of kinetic force with thermal energy intact. Harry looked at the figures. He looked at Tom. He said, "You are genuinely extraordinary." "I know," Tom said. "Now look at the implications." They worked through the implications for the next 3 hours, and when the library closed at noon and they walked out into the grey January high street, Harry was thinking about the shape of magic as something that could be approached from so many angles that most people only ever saw one face of it, and Tom was talking about a paper she wanted to write when they were old enough, an actual academic paper, for the wizarding journals, under a name she'd have to invent because no wizarding journal in the current climate would publish theory this advanced from someone without a pedigree, and Harry was laughing at the specificity of her outrage about academic credentialism, and it occurred to him with the clarity that sometimes comes when you're not looking for it that he had never, in his entire life, felt more himself than he did in these conversations. He thought about what Tom had said in the park, back in August. "I wanted someone to know. Not to approve or disapprove. Just to know." He understood it completely. "Tom," he said. "What?" "For what it's worth," he said. "About the Horcrux theory. I'll help you figure out the right way to do it. When we know enough." "I mean that." Tom walked beside him in silence for a moment. The January wind was cold enough to make her pull the cardigan closed, and her breath made small clouds in the air. She looked straight ahead. "I know you do," she said. They walked the rest of the way to the bus stop in companionable quiet, and stood waiting for Harry's bus in the cold, and Tom took a book out of her bag and read standing up while they waited, which was completely typical, and Harry watched the road and kept the ambient protective field around them both without thinking about it, warm and automatic as breathing. The bus came. Harry got on. Through the window he saw Tom already walking back toward the library. She had another 2 hours before her own bus. She always did, she always spent them reading, the most efficient use of any available time, completely characteristic, completely her, and she didn't look back. She never looked back when he left. He'd noticed that. He thought about what that meant and decided it meant nothing sentimental, which was very Tom, and also that it meant she would always be there to look back to, which he thought was the actual point she was making. He leaned his head against the cold bus window and watched Little Whinging go past. 2 years until Hogwarts. They were going to be ready. Chapter 3, Diagon. The summer of 1991 arrived with the specific weight of something that had been building for 2 years finally deciding to move. Tom was 11 now. Harry was 2, since July, and the letters had come, both of them, within days of each other, delivered by owls that seemed confused by the logistics, one arriving at Privet Drive at 6 in the morning and one at Wool's 2 days later, both bearing the Hogwarts seal, both containing the same list of supplies and the same instructions about the leaky cauldron and the 1st of September. Tom read hers twice, put it in her notebook, and wrote to Harry, Diagon Alley. Saturday. I'll be at the leaky cauldron at 9. Harry wrote back, I'll be there. Also, I think my letter was delayed. The owl looked personally offended about Privet Drive. Tom didn't write back to this, partly because she had nothing to add and partly because she was smiling at the time and she had a policy about not writing things when she was smiling since it tended to affect her tone. Saturday arrived. She told Mrs. Cole she was going to London for the day, which was true. Mrs. Cole had stopped interrogating Tom's movement some time ago with the relieved air of someone who has decided that the least dangerous approach to a complicated situation is strategic non-engagement. Tom took the bus at 7, arrived at Charing Cross Road at 8:30, and found Harry already at the leaky cauldron, sitting in the corner with a cup of tea he hadn't drunk, watching the door. He'd grown. She'd last seen him 3 weeks ago, but puberty had apparently decided to do something noticeable in the interim. He was taller, his shoulders had broadened slightly, and the green eyes behind his glasses were sharp in the specific way she'd been cataloging for 2 years. He was wearing clothes that fit better than the ones she'd met him in, which she knew was the result of his having quietly sold back some of the Desley purchased items in the past year and bought replacements with the proceeds. The glasses were the ones she'd fixed, plus 3 subsequent repairs. He looked up and saw her, and something in his face did the quick, quiet thing it always did, not quite a smile, more like a settling, like something that had been slightly unresolved resolving. "You're early," he said. "You're earlier," she said, sitting down. "I've been awake since 4, he admitted. "First time in the wizarding world properly. I kept thinking I'd fall back asleep and miss it." "You wouldn't have missed it. I'd have come and got you." "I know," he said, the same way he always said it, simple, matter of fact, like he'd long since stopped needing to verify it. The leaky cauldron was doing its morning business around them, witches and wizards in robes, a wizard reading a newspaper that was moving, 2 small children arguing about which of them got to carry the owl cage. Tom catalogued all of it with the pleasure of finally seeing in person what she'd been reading about for 4 years. The magical world was exactly as she'd imagined it, and also not at all as she'd imagined it, in the way that reality is always both more detailed and more mundane than its description. "Tom Marvolo Riddle and Harry James Potter," said a voice. They both looked up. The man standing at the edge of their table was short and bald and wearing robes that were very slightly too fine for the leaky cauldron, like a small bird that had dressed for a different occasion. He had a look on his face that Tom translated immediately as, "I know exactly who you both are, and I have been standing here deciding whether to say anything for about 30 seconds. "You have the advantage of us," Tom said pleasantly. The man blinked. "Ah, forgive me. Garrick Ollivander. I make wands." He gestured vaguely in the direction of the alley behind the pub. "I was having my morning tea. I recognized you both from, well." He looked at Harry. "Your mother's eyes, Mr. Potter. Lily Potter was one of my finest customers. Her wand was willow, 10¼ inches, swishy, excellent for charm work." He turned to Tom. "And you, Miss Riddle. I recognized you because I've been expecting you for some time. There are wands in my shop that have been waiting." "Waiting," Tom said. "Wands choose wizards. Or witches, as the case may be." He smiled, a small slightly eerie smile. "Some of them wait longer than others." He looked between them for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully decode, not quite wary, not quite curious, something in between. "You know each other already." "That's unusual." "We're friends," Harry said. Ollivander looked at them both again with that complicated expression. "Yes," he said, slowly. "I imagine you are." He straightened up. "I'll expect you in the shop today. Good morning." He left. Tom watched him go. Well, Harry said. He knows more than he said, Tom said. Most people who know things do. Tom looked at Harry and found him watching her with a slight smile, the quick real one. She turned back to her tea. Gringotts first, she said. Then the rest. Gringotts was everything the texts had described and more. The white building at the end of Diagon Alley, the goblin tellers with their sharp eyes and sharper expressions, the particular institutional grandeur of a place that had been very good at one thing for a very long time and was calmly, completely aware of this. Tom walked through the main doors with the specific pleasure of entering a place she'd researched thoroughly and finding the research had been adequate. Harry was quiet beside her. He'd been quiet since they'd entered the alley, not the comfortable quiet of their library sessions but something more internal, processing the sensory impact of a world he'd known about for 2 years but never actually stood inside. She left him to it. He'd find his footing faster without being talked at. The goblin who took Harry's key was polite in the specific way that goblins were polite, which was not particularly warm but was rigidly professional. He looked at the key, looked at Harry, looked at the key again. Potter Vault, he said. Cart 7. Griphook will assist you. He paused. There is also the matter of the primary trust vault. You'll want to speak to the senior manager about that, Mr. Potter. The estate review has been pending for some time. Harry looked at Tom. Tom looked at the goblin. What estate review? She said. The Potter family estate, the goblin said, with the patience of someone explaining something that should be obvious. The primary vault was sealed in 1981 per emergency protocols. The boy who lived clause in the Potter family trust activated upon Mr. Potter's first contact with Gringotts. He looked at Harry. You have not been in previously? No, Harry said. The goblin's expression did something that, on a human face, would have been meaningful but on a goblin face was nearly impossible to read. He said something in rapid gobbledygook to a colleague. The colleague said something back. The first goblin looked at Harry with what Tom was fairly certain was a carefully managed version of outrage. Your magical guardian was responsible for bringing you to Gringotts to initiate estate access. That should have occurred no later than your 7th birthday. My magical guardian, Harry said. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, said the goblin, reading from a document. Named as temporary custodian of the Potter estate and of the person of Harry James Potter by the emergency decree of the Wisengamot, November 1981. Harry turned to look at Tom. Tom was already looking at him. She was thinking several things simultaneously, all of them precise and none of them pleasant, and her face was very still in the way it went when something had confirmed a theory she'd been hoping was wrong. I'd like to speak to the senior manager, Harry said. His voice was completely even. Now, if possible. The senior manager's name was Ragnarok and his office was 3 floors below the main banking hall, accessible by a lift that moved sideways as well as down and that Tom found technically fascinating. Ragnarok was very old and had the manner of someone who had been annoyed by wizards consistently for about 4 centuries and had made peace with this. He looked at Harry across a desk piled with scrolls and said, with minimal preamble, the Potter estate was last formally accessed in 1981. Since then, disbursements have been made to the following parties. He slid a scroll across the desk. Harry took it. He read it. His face didn't change but Tom, watching his hands, saw his fingers tighten slightly on the edge of the parchment. She was watching from the chair beside him, which she'd taken without being invited, and Ragnarok had looked at her and said, "And you are," with the air of someone who wanted the information not to share it but to file it properly, which she respected. She'd said, "Tom Riddle, a friend," and he'd filed it and moved on. "The Dursleys," Harry said, setting the scroll down. "They've been receiving payments from my estate. Monthly disbursements for the care and keeping of the ward," Ragnarok said. "Authorized by the custodian." "For 10 years, Harry said. "Yes." "And the vault balance?" Ragnarok turned another scroll. Harry read it. Tom watched his face. There was a moment, just a moment, where something moved through his expression that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief and was, she thought, the specific feeling of understanding exactly how thoroughly you have been used by people who were supposed to be responsible for your well-being. It passed. Harry set the scroll down with the same even hands and said, "What are my options, legally, regarding the custodianship?" At 11, Ragnarok said, "You cannot dissolve it unilaterally. At 14, you can petition the Wiesengemot for emancipation. In the interim," he paused, and Tom caught a fractional shift in his expression, something she read as professional respect for someone asking the right questions. "In the interim, you may restrict the custodian's access to estate disbursements. The custodian retains decision-making authority over your person, but the financial management can be transferred to Gringotts acting as independent trustee. This is within your rights as a Potter." "Do that," Harry said. Ragnarok made a note. "The Dursley payments will cease as of this date. The custodian will be notified through official channels." He looked at Harry over the desk. "He will not be pleased." "I imagine not," Harry said pleasantly. Tom was watching him and thinking, this is why I never worry about him. He had just found out that the most powerful wizard in Britain had been financially profiting from a decade of his miserable circumstances, and he was sitting in a goblin's office dissolving the arrangement with the efficient calm of someone conducting routine business. No performance, no breakdown, no hesitation. Just, "This is wrong, here is the remedy, do the remedy." She thought this was one of the best things she had ever seen. Ragnarok produced further scrolls. The Potter estate was, it turned out, considerably more substantial than Harry had known. The savings vault he'd been told about was the household account. The primary trust vault contained investments, property holdings, and a sealed magical archive that required Harry's blood to open and which had been sitting there, sealed, since 1981. There was also a letter. Ragnarok held it out. Left by Lily Potter. To be opened by her son on his first visit to Gringotts. Harry took it. He held it for a moment. Tom looked at the window. Ragnarok's office had no windows, just a painting of a mountain range, but she looked at it the way she'd have looked at a window, because this was a private thing and Harry had never asked her to look away from anything, but she understood instinctively that this was the first letter he'd ever had from his dead mother and it required a moment of privacy even if they were in the same room. She heard the sound of an envelope opening. She heard Harry breathing steadily. She heard the particular quality of a silence that has feeling in it. Then Harry said, quietly, she knew something was wrong. With the plan. With wherever Dumbledore was putting me. A pause. She wrote it down. She told me, she said if I was reading this, it meant something had gone wrong and I should trust Gringotts and should trust my own judgment and should know that she loved my father and that she loved me and that she spent the last month of her life trying to find a better solution. Another pause. And that she was sorry she ran out of time. Tom looked at him. He was holding the letter with both hands and looking at it, and his face was doing the complicated multi-layer thing, and Tom thought, again, with the same immediacy she'd felt on the pavement in 1989, the cold, specific anger. Not hot. Cold. The kind that comes from something being not just wrong but systematically wrong, arranged wrong, wrong by someone's deliberate choice. Harry, she said. I'm fine, he said. And he was, she could see he was, in the way he was always fine, fundamentally solid underneath whatever was moving through him. But fine and unaffected were different things. I know, she said. I'm just saying your name. He looked at her. Something in his face settled. He folded the letter carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. He looked back at Ragnarok. What's in the sealed archive? Restricted access. Blood keyed. You'll need to come below, to the vault. Today? If you wish. Yes, Harry said. The vault was deep in the mountain, reached by the roller coaster terrifying cart system that Tom found, in spite of everything, genuinely exhilarating. The way it plunged through the dark with total commitment, no handholds, just speed and the certain physics of the track, was clarifying in a way she appreciated. She didn't grip the sides. Harry didn't either. They both sat with their hands in their laps and their eyes open, which the goblin driver, Griphook, seemed to find unusual. The Potter vault was exactly what the stories described, piles of gold galleons catching the torchlight, the smell of old money and old magic. Harry looked at it with calm assessment, took a reasonable number of galleons for the day's shopping, and moved directly to the sealed archive in the back corner. It was a chest, iron-bound, with a lock that had no keyhole. Harry put his hand flat on the top and Tom felt the magic respond, a pulse, a recognition, the chest reading his blood the way the deepest magical objects read identity, not through symbol but through essence. The lock opened. Inside were three things. A wand, old, the wood dark with age, wrapped in cloth. A folded cloak, silver gray, with a quality that made Tom's eyes want to slide off it. And a thick leather folder of documents. Harry took out the cloak first. He unfolded it and looked at it, and Tom looked at it too, and she said, before she could entirely stop herself, "That's an invisibility cloak." "Is it good?" Harry asked, examining it. "There are invisibility cloaks and there are invisibility cloaks," Tom said, carefully. "The latter are extraordinarily rare. They don't degrade. They can't be seen through by revealing charms. The best ones are, the texts describe one that was supposed to be an actual deathly hallow." She reached out and touched the hem. The fabric moved under her fingers like water. She felt the magic in it and went very still. "Harry." "Yeah?" "Don't ever let Dumbledore know you have this." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because in the last year I've been researching the 3 Deathly Hallows as a side study," Tom said, keeping her voice low even in the empty vault, "and there are exactly 3 accounts that place one of the Hallows in a family's possession in the last 2 centuries. One of those families is the Potters." She looked at the cloak in his hands. "If this is what I think it is, it's the most powerful object of concealment in the world. And it's yours. And I don't think Dumbledore knows it's here." Harry turned the cloak over in his hands one more time. He was thinking, she could see it, the still quiet processing, and then he looked at her and said, "He sealed the estate. Kept me away from Gringotts. Never brought me here." "Yes," Tom said. "He either didn't know it was here, or he didn't want me to have it." "Either possibility is interesting," Tom said. "And both suggest the same practical response." Harry folded the cloak back up and put it in his jacket, which shouldn't have fit, but the cloak apparently understood its own properties and arranged itself accordingly. "What about the wand?" "Leave it for now. It's been waiting since 1981, it can wait until we understand more." She picked up the leather folder of documents. "May I?" "Go ahead." She went through them standing in the vault, reading quickly, the torchlight sufficient for her purposes. Most were legal documents, estate management records, property deeds, trust fund parameters. But 3/4 of the way through, she found something that made her stop. It was a report. Handwritten, on plain parchment, dated November 3, 1981, 2 days after the attack at Godric's Hollow. The handwriting was neat and academic and the author had signed it at the bottom, Nicholas Flamel. She read it twice. She handed it to Harry without speaking. He read it. His eyes moved down the page with that fast, full attention, and she watched his expression go through several stages. He finished and looked up. "Flamel knew," he said. "Flamel knew," Tom said. "The soul fragment in your scar, he theorized it within 48 hours of the attack. He wrote it up and apparently sent copies to Dumbledore and to your parents' solicitors." She tapped the folder. "It ended up here. Filed away. Sealed. Dumbledore knows about the fragment," Harry said. "He's always known," Tom said. "From the very beginning. The vault was very quiet. Somewhere above them, miles of rock and the normal world. Harry looked at the parchment in his hands. "He knows I have a piece of Voldemort in me," he said slowly, "and he put me in that house, and he never told me anything. He never came to explain. He sent no one. He just waited." "He's waiting for something specific," Tom said. "And I think the report tells us what." She turned to the page she'd marked mentally. Flamel writes here, Section 3, the theoretical implications. He says the fragment can be destroyed. He says the only method he can identify involves the death of the host body. He says he told Dumbledore this and recommended intensive research into alternatives. Harry was looking at her with complete steadiness and complete understanding. "He's keeping you available," Tom said, and kept her voice flat and factual because flat and factual was what this moment required. "He believes that to finally destroy Voldemort, the fragment in you will need to be destroyed. And he believes the only way to do that is to kill me," Harry said. "Yes." A silence. "And the Dursleys," Harry said. "The miserable 10 years in that house. Keep you controllable," Tom said. "Keep you small and manageable. People who don't know what they're worth are easier to direct toward outcomes they haven't chosen." Harry set Flamel's report down on top of the other documents. He smoothed the top edge of the parchment with one finger, a small precise gesture that she'd come to recognize as his version of the thing she did with her notebook, a physical organization accompanying a mental one. He wasn't afraid. That was the thing about him that she had known from the pavement in 1989 and that had never once been disproven in 2 years of knowing him as well as she'd ever known anything. Not fearless in the way that meant he didn't feel anything. He clearly felt a great deal, all of it at full depth, but fearless in the way that meant he didn't let the feeling become an obstacle. He felt it, he understood it, he moved. "Flamel said there were alternatives," he said. "He said he recommended researching alternatives. He doesn't describe what they are. But they exist. He believed they existed. He was a serious scholar," Tom said. "He wouldn't write alternatives exist as a professional statement if he didn't have a theoretical basis for it." Harry looked at her. "Your Horcrux research. The soul magic. The architecture." "Yes," Tom said. "Could it? I don't know yet," Tom said, and she was being honest, which she was always being with him. "But the fragment in your scar and the architecture I've been building, they're the same category of magic. Soul anchoring. If the fragment is the problem, the question is whether it can be extracted rather than destroyed along with you." She held his gaze. "I'm going to find out." "I know you are," Harry said, simply. "I might be wrong." "You're not wrong often." "I might be this time." "Then we'll figure it out together," Harry said, in the same tone, the same simple finality. "I'm not going anywhere." She heard it in everything he didn't add. Tom put Flamel's report and the most relevant documents into her bag with the systematic efficiency of someone who has decided to take all available resources and deal with the feelings about the situation later, privately, in her room at Wool's, in the dark. Harry put the rest back in the chest, left it open so it would be accessible on their return, and they went back through the vault past the gold and out to where Griphook was waiting with the cart and the dark tunnel that smelled of cold stone and old magic and the particular exhilarating certainty of a world that was very large and full of things worth understanding. They didn't speak on the cart ride back up. They didn't need to. Diagon Alley in high summer was exactly the chaos the texts had suggested, robes shops and cauldron suppliers and a bustle of families doing precisely the same shopping they were here to do, children pulling parents toward window displays, owls in cages giving everyone in range a look of lofty judgment. Tom moved through it with the efficiency she brought to all procurement tasks, consulting her list, making decisions quickly and without deliberation at each stop. She did not browse. She identified, evaluated, and obtained. Harry kept pace beside her and occasionally pointed things out that she would have passed because they were off-list but that turned out, on closer inspection, to be worth noting. This was their usual collaboration in physical environments. Tom provided direction, Harry provided peripheral attention. The combination was, she had found, very effective. They bought robes at Madame Malkin's, where another girl was already being fitted, bushy-haired, eager-looking, already trying to strike up conversation about Hogwarts houses with the focus of someone who has read Hogwarts, a history multiple times and would very much like to discuss it. Tom let Harry handle that exchange, which he did with his characteristic ease. Tom bought her robes in black and a second set in dark green, which the seamstress noted approvingly was Slytherin colors. Tom noted that she hadn't decided on a house yet, and the seamstress smiled and said, "Of course not, dear." Flourish and Blots provided the standard texts and, more interestingly, the advanced practical casting supplement she'd been aware of but unable to source previously, which was sold in the Hogwarts section but not listed on any standard first-year supply list. She bought it anyway and added the standard book of spells grade 5 to her purchases, which the shop assistant noted was somewhat beyond first-year curriculum. "I read ahead," Tom said, pleasantly, "and paid for it." They were outside Ollivander's at 1:30. The shop was narrow and dusty and full of boxes stacked floor to ceiling, and Ollivander was already there, as if he'd been waiting, which perhaps he had. He looked at them both with the same expression he'd worn in the leaky cauldron that morning, complicated, assessing. "Miss Riddle," he said. "Let us start with you." He measured her with a tape that moved on its own, span, wrist, arm, length of finger, space between her eyes, and then began bringing boxes. The first wand, ash, dragon heartstring, 11 inches. She picked it up and felt nothing, or worse than nothing, a faint wrong note, like a chord resolving incorrectly. The second, cherry wood, unicorn hair. Better, but imprecise. Third, fourth, fifth. Ollivander watched each attempt with the intensifying focus of someone whose hypothesis is being confirmed. He went to the very back of the shop, climbed a ladder, and came back with a box that was dustier than the rest. "You," he said, setting it down. 13.5 inches. Phoenix feather. He paused, looking at the box rather than at her. "This wand has been in my shop for a very long time. It has turned away every candidate I've tried it with." He opened the box. Tom picked it up. The magic came up through her hand like a conversation being resumed after a long wait, the specific quality of something that had been ready and patient and was now, simply, engaged. She felt it settle from her hand through her arm and into the deep architecture, the places where her own magic lived, and it fit there perfectly, the way a key fits a lock it was made for. Ollivander exhaled. It was a small sound but she caught it. "You," he said, "is associated with death and rebirth. With endings and the things that persist past them." He looked at her with those complicated eyes. "I'm not sure whether to congratulate you, Miss Riddle." "I am," Tom said, and looked at the wand in her hand. Then it was Harry's turn. Ollivander measured, brought boxes, watched. The first 3 wands were wrong. Harry picked them up and set them down with the evaluative pragmatism he brought to all choices. The 4th was better. The 5th better still, but still not right. Ollivander went to a different corner of the shop, to a case separated from the stacked boxes, unlocked it with a small key on his watch chain. He came back with a box that was wrapped differently from the others, velvet rather than plain cardboard, and he looked at Harry when he held it out with an expression Tom had stopped trying to fully decode. Harry opened it. Inside was a wand of holly, 11 inches, with a grip worn smooth as though it had been handled often, though the magic in it felt entirely new, entirely waiting. He picked it up. What happened was not the shower of sparks that had followed Tom's selection. What happened was quieter and more absolute. The ambient pressure in the shop shifted, the way pressure shifts before a storm, and every box on every shelf trembled slightly, a single deep vibration passing through all of them at once, and then it was still. Harry stood with the wand in his hand and looked at it with an expression that was completely calm and completely attentive. "Holly and phoenix feather," Ollivander said, into the quiet. 11 inches. pliable. His voice was different now, lower, more careful. That is curious. Very curious. Because it's similar to hers? Harry said, glancing at Tom. Because, Ollivander said, its core feather came from the same phoenix that provided the feather for Miss Riddle's wand. He paused. And the same phoenix that provided the feather for one other wand I made, 30 years ago. The wand that gave you that scar, Mr. Potter. The shop was very quiet. Tom looked at Harry. Harry looked at Ollivander. Brothers, Harry said. Not alarmed. Turning it over like information. In a manner of speaking, Ollivander said. He was looking at them both now, Tom with her wand, Harry with his holly one. You know, he said, and she heard something genuine in it, behind all the careful professional mystique, I wonder sometimes whether I sell wands or whether the wands simply wait, and I am merely the occasion for the meeting. He looked at them very seriously. The two of you, together, with these specific wands, I have been making wands for 70 years, and I have never seen a configuration quite like it. I don't know what it means. But I believe it means something. Most things do, Tom said. If you pay attention. Ollivander smiled. It was the first fully genuine smile she'd seen from him. Indeed, he said. That'll be 7 galleons each. They ate lunch at a small cafe in the alley that Harry found by the simple method of smelling something good and following it, which was a characteristically instinctive navigation strategy that Tom wouldn't have used herself but which produced a table in the sun and a menu that was entirely acceptable. She ate and read Flamel's report again, because she thought better with food. Harry ate and was quiet for a while. Then he said, we should find Flamel. Yes, Tom said, without looking up. Before Hogwarts, ideally. He's in Devon. I know approximately where. He's not in any official directories but the correspondence trails from the 1945 magical records lead to a property near Exeter. She turned a page. He'll be easier to approach than Dumbledore because he has no official position to protect. He's just a very old scholar who knows things. Dumbledore keeps the Philosopher's Stone at Gringotts, Harry said. Or he's about to. I heard 2 goblins talking about a transfer order while we were in Ragnarok's office. Tom looked up. When? While you were reading. I was listening. He met her eyes. He's moving it from Gringotts to Hogwarts. Why would he? Tom stopped. Thought. He's preparing a trap, she said slowly. He's moving the stone somewhere he can control the approach to. Somewhere he can see who comes for it. Voldemort, Harry said. He's expecting Voldemort to come back. And he needs Voldemort to come back, Tom said, following the thread, before he can end things. Because before things can end, the fragment needs to, she stopped. Needs to be dealt with, Harry said. Meaning me. You keep saying it very calmly. Would it help if I didn't? Harry said. Tom looked at him. No, she admitted. Then there's no reason to. He ate the last of his lunch with complete composure. So Dumbledore is setting a trap at Hogwarts. Voldemort, what's left of him, is somewhere, building back. And we're starting school in September. He looked up. Do we want to interfere with the stone? Tom thought about this properly, because it deserved proper thought. The Philosopher's Stone produced the elixir of life. Flamel had been using it for 600 years. If she were being honest with herself, the stone's existence was philosophically adjacent to what she was building with the Horcrux theory. Both of them were approaches to the same problem of permanence and mortality, just from different angles. The stone's approach was more limited in scope but more immediately practical. No, she said. Not yet. The stone is bait. If we touch the bait, we change the situation before we understand it. What I want is to understand it first. She looked at the report. I want Flamel. Flamel, Harry agreed. Before September. I'll write this week. He might not write back. Then I'll go to Exeter and find the property, Tom said. Harry smiled the quick smile. Of course you will. They paid for lunch and walked the rest of the alley in the afternoon warmth, not quite shopping now, just, in the world. The magical world that was theirs by right and by birth and that had been kept from Harry specifically for reasons that were becoming clearer and more enraging the more Tom examined them. She walked with her bag full of books and her wand in her inside pocket and Flamel's report memorized and thought about the shape of the next 2 months before Hogwarts. Beside her, Harry was quiet and present and complete, the way he always was, his holly wand in his jacket pocket and his dead mother's letter in the other and his completely untheatrical calmness about the reality of his situation sitting around him like something he'd worn for so long it had taken his shape. Harry, she said. The fragment in your scar, she said. I want you to know that I'm going to find a way to remove it. Not destroy it with you still attached to it. Remove it. Separately. She kept her voice even. I'm going to solve that problem before it becomes relevant. Harry was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. I'm not just saying it. I know that too, he said. That's why I said I know and not thank you. Tom walked beside him and felt the resonance between them, the familiar deep pull that she'd stopped finding bewildering and had started finding simply true. The way her wand in her pocket was true. The way the yew and the phoenix feather fitting her hand had been true. Some things were simply correct and the correctness didn't need explanation. 2 more things, Harry said, as they reached the leaky cauldron and the boundary back to the ordinary world. What? When you write to Flamel. Tell him I have his report. That'll get a response faster than anything else. Good, Tom said. What's the second? Harry looked at her. Whatever Dumbledore's been planning for the last 10 years. Whatever shape he has in mind for how this all ends. His green eyes were steady and direct and utterly without drama. He designed it without accounting for you. He doesn't know you exist, not really, not what you know and what you can do and what we've built together. He paused. I think that's the most important variable in all of this. Tom held his gaze for a moment. Yes, she said. It is. They went back through the pub and into the grey London street and the ordinary summer, and Tom thought about September and Hogwarts and Dumbledore and Voldemort's fragment and the stone and all the complicated machinery of fate that had been running for 10 years toward an ending that she had no intention of accepting as written. She thought about the architecture she was building, careful and precise and entirely hers. She thought about Harry walking beside her in the ordinary world, carrying an invisibility cloak that might be a deathly hallow and a letter from his dead mother and a piece of the darkest wizard of the last century embedded in his lightning bolt scar, none of which made him anything less than completely himself. She thought, Dumbledore designed a tragedy. He's very good at it. But he's never had to account for 2 people who already know the ending and have spent 2 years building something he has no category for. The bus stop was ahead. London was itself around them, loud and ordinary and indifferent. Tom Riddle smiled. Not the practiced one for adults. The real one, which almost no one ever saw. She thought, let him try. Chapter 4, Hogwarts. The Hogwarts Express left at 11, and Tom was on the platform at 10:15. She stood at the barrier to platform 9 3/4 with her trunk and her bag and her owl. She'd bought the owl 3 weeks ago, a small grey one with a personality she'd assessed as rigorously independent and therefore compatible with her own, and she watched the other families go through the barrier with the specific attention she gave to any threshold she was crossing for the first time. Looking for the variables. The pattern of who hesitated and who didn't. The difference between people who knew what they were walking into and people performing confidence they didn't quite have. Then she walked through and the platform was there, all steam and red engine and noise, and she stood for a moment in the specific pleasure of arriving somewhere she'd been anticipating for 2 years and finding it exactly right. Harry came through the barrier 4 minutes after her. He was alone, he'd told her he would be, that he'd find a way to get himself to King's Cross without Desley assistance, which he'd managed by the straightforward method of getting up at 6 and leaving before anyone was awake. He had his trunk and his school bag and no owl, because he hadn't bought one yet and had expressed no urgency about it, which Tom suspected meant he'd find one at Hogwarts that found him first, which was how things tended to work for Harry. He saw her and came directly over, no scanning the platform, no hesitation. She wondered sometimes whether he tracked her the same way she tracked him, the ambient awareness of each other's presence that had developed so gradually over 2 years that she couldn't point to when it had stopped being notable and started being simply the background condition of her attention. "Did Flamel write back?" he said, by way of greeting. "Yesterday," Tom said. "The letter's in my bag. We'll talk on the train." Harry looked at the platform. He looked at the train, then at the families and students around them, already the curious look starting, the recognition, a girl nearby nudging her mother and pointing at his forehead. Harry had a policy about the forehead, which was to let the scar be visible and watch what people did with the information. He'd told Tom this policy and she'd told him it was good surveillance methodology, and he'd said he hadn't been thinking of it that way, but she could think of it that way if she wanted. "Do we have to sit in a compartment with other people?" he said. "We need information about the school's social structure," Tom said. "Sitting with other people provides that." She considered. "1 compartment's worth. Then we can move." "All right." He picked up his trunk. "You found the Flamel property, then?" The letter came to the Wool's address. He wrote in French initially, which was probably a test, and when I responded in French he switched to English and became somewhat more forthcoming. She moved toward the train. "He wants to meet. After term starts," he said, Hogwarts specifically. "He said he has a reason for wanting to be near the school this year." Harry absorbed this. "Because of the stone." "Because of the stone," Tom confirmed. They found a compartment near the middle of the train and Tom put her trunk in the overhead rack with efficient precision. Harry did the same, and then sat back and looked at the platform through the window as the train began to fill around them, and Tom took Flamel's letter out of her bag and read it again while she waited to see who would join them. The first to arrive was a boy with red hair and hand-me-down robes and the open, adaptable face of someone from a large family. She recognized the quality of his ease with strangers, which came from never having had the option of being without them. He looked at the compartment, looked at them, and said, "All right if I sit here?" Everywhere else is full, with the honest directness of someone who hadn't yet learned to be strategic about how he presented himself. Tom looked at Harry. Harry nodded fractionally. "Sit down," Tom said. He sat. He was called Ron Weasley. He was starting first year, he had 6 brothers and a sister and his family had all been in Gryffindor, and he'd heard Harry Potter was going to be starting this year. He said all of this in about 3 minutes with the unstoppable conversational momentum of someone who has never had a quiet house and therefore defaulted to filling silence. Tom found him straightforwardly likable in the specific way she found useful people likable. He was genuine, he was perceptive underneath the performance of easiness, and he was watching both of them with more attention than his chattiness suggested. Harry said his name and Ron went slightly big-eyed about it, and then apparently decided to simply move past the celebrity component of the situation because dwelling on it would be awkward, which Tom noted as a point in his favor. "You're Tom Riddle," Ron said to her, with a different quality of attention. "My mum mentioned you." She said. He stopped. "What did she say?" Tom asked pleasantly. "That you're quite," he appeared to be navigating something. "Brilliant," he settled on. "She said you were brilliant." "That was diplomatic," Tom said. "What did she actually say?" Ron looked at her for a moment, and then grinned, a real grin, slightly rueful. "She said you were brilliant and that she didn't know what to make of you, and that we should be polite." "Sound advice," Tom said. "Tell her I said so." The second arrival was the bushy-haired girl from Madame Malkin's, who appeared in the compartment doorway with a cat in her arms and the book she'd been reading still open in her other hand, and asked if they'd seen a toad, because a boy named Neville had lost his. They hadn't seen a toad. She introduced herself as Hermione Granger, confirmed she'd memorized Hogwarts, a history and most of the standard texts, and looked at Tom and Harry with the specific focused interest of someone identifying the people in any room who might be worth talking to. Tom put Flamel's letter away and let the conversation run. She listened more than she spoke, which was always her preference in new environments, and catalogued the information. The social landscape of this year's intake was going to be interesting. Ron Weasley knew the culture from the inside but was unimpressed by hierarchy for its own sake. Hermione Granger was academically exceptional and socially uncertain and would be formidable if she found her footing. Harry was handling the celebrity problem with the same calm efficiency he brought to everything, deflecting questions about himself by asking better questions back, which she knew was a deliberate technique he developed and which worked beautifully. The countryside was going past now, green and rolling, and Tom sat with her knees together and her hands in her lap and thought about Flamel's letter and the stone and the approaching school and the conversation with Ragnarok and all the moving pieces of a situation that had been decades in the making and that they were now inside. She thought about the sorting. She had thought about the sorting quite a lot in the last month. The question of which house was somewhat more complicated for her than for most students, not because she didn't know her own qualities, she knew them precisely, but because she'd spent 2 years understanding that the obvious answer and the strategically optimal answer were not necessarily the same. Slytherin was the obvious answer. The bloodline, the Parseltongue, the methodology. Everything about her read Slytherin and she'd have sorted there without question at 7. But she was not 7 anymore. She knew more now. She had Harry's perspective and 2 years of examining her own assumptions and a thorough reading of magical history that had clarified something important. Slytherin's legacy in the current era was primarily a house full of children from families with specific political allegiances, and those allegiances were going to spend the next 7 years being aggressively wrong about most things. She'd be right at home in terms of ambition and she'd spend every day managing people whose worldview she found intellectually contemptible. She had not yet decided what to do about this. Harry looked at her across the compartment. He did it quietly, in the way he sometimes did when he thought she was working something out and wanted to make clear that he wasn't going to interrupt. She gave him a very small nod to acknowledge this, which he returned with the same slight inclination. Ron was watching them do this. "Do you two have, like, a whole language?" he said. "Yes," Harry said. "Right," Ron said, apparently deciding this was acceptable. The castle appeared out of the darkness and the rain and everyone's breath went quiet for a moment, which Tom thought was appropriate. Hogwarts was enormous in the way that things built with genuine magic were enormous, not just physically large but present, weighted with accumulated years and accumulated spells and the specific gravity of a place where extraordinary things had been happening for a very long time. She looked at it from the boats with the same full attention she'd given to everything this day and felt something she recognized from the books as what they called recognition of magical origin, the castle's ambient magic finding the magic in her and acknowledging it, the way two fires in the same room feel each other's warmth. Harry was looking at it too, from the boat beside hers, and she didn't need to see his expression to know it matched hers. The interior, more gravity, more accumulated magic, more history in the stone. The moving portraits noticed them, she saw paintings turn as they walked through the entrance hall, watching with painted eyes that held more than oil and canvas should hold. She watched them back. The sorting was in the great hall, 4 tables, hundreds of candles, 400 faces turning to look at the first years filing in. Tom walked at the front of the group, she'd positioned herself there because it was the most information-efficient vantage point, and looked at the hall with calm comprehensive attention. Staff table at the front, she identified Dumbledore in the center chair immediately, white-bearded, half-moon glasses, the same warm composure she'd seen at Wool's. He was looking at the first years with benevolent interest. His eyes found her and she saw them still for a fraction of a second before the warmth resumed. She gave him a small, polite smile. His resumed warmth shifted slightly, fractionally, a recalculation happening behind it. She'd expected that. Good. She found Snape at the staff table, black robes, black hair, the expression of someone who had decided to be unimpressed by this year's intake preemptively. He was looking at Harry with an expression she recognized from the brief research she'd done on him, complicated, multi-layered, not quite what his surface suggested. The sorting hat was placed on a stool at the front. It sang its song. She listened with genuine attention because the song contained information about the houses that the official materials softened into meaninglessness, and then McGonagall began calling names. Granger, Hermione. Gryffindor, quickly, the hat barely touching her head. Names Tom didn't know yet. Longbottom, Neville. Gryffindor, after a pause. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something significant happens. Harry walked to the stool with the specific unhurried quality that Tom had come to think of as simply Harry walking, and sat down, and McGonagall placed the hat on his head. The hat was silent for a very long time. Then it said, loudly, into the very quiet hall, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table erupted. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to McGonagall with a brief nod of thanks that was so natural it was almost funny, and walked to the Gryffindor table where Ron Weasley was already making room with enthusiastic waving. Tom watched him sit down. He looked across the hall at her, and she looked back, and there was nothing remarkable about either expression. They'd known this would happen or something like it. They'd discussed houses in the abstract many times, but she held his gaze for a moment and he held hers, and then McGonagall called the next name. Riddle, Tomasia. She walked to the stool. She sat down. McGonagall placed the hat on her head. It was dark inside the hat and then it wasn't. It was the presence of something very old and attentive, something that had been reading people for centuries and had long since stopped being surprised by them, and it settled around her thoughts with a familiar thoroughness she didn't resist. "Ah," said the hat. Not aloud. In the specific interior quality of a very old intelligence addressing itself to you directly. "You, I was wondering about." "Were you?" Tom said, equally internally. "You're the most interesting first year I've had in some considerable time," the hat said. "And the last one I said that about is currently more smoke than person, so perhaps that's not the compliment it sounds." A pause. "Slytherin, of course. In terms of raw categorization. The ambition, the cunning, the bloodline. Shall I?" "No," Tom said. "Thought so." Another pause. "Tell me why." "Because Slytherin's current social ecosystem is organized around an ideology I find both wrong and boring," Tom said. "And because the house that would be most useful for what I'm doing is Slytherin's traditional rival. Proximity to opposition is always more strategically valuable than comfort." "And the boy at the Gryffindor table? That's not a factor in the reasoning. Isn't it?" Tom didn't answer this. The hat seemed amused, in the way that something very old is amused by things it has seen before. "Ravenclaw would take you happily. The intellect is extraordinary. Hufflepuff, no, not Hufflepuff, though your loyalty runs deeper than you think. Gryffindor. Is that a question? It's an observation. What the boy has and what you have are not the same thing, but they're not as different as you'd prefer to think. There is courage in you, Tom Riddle. A specific kind, the kind that comes from having nothing safe and therefore having nothing to lose by being exactly what you are." A pause. "You've never been afraid of anyone." "Not truly." "No," Tom agreed. "That's Gryffindor," the hat said. "Or it's something the hat can only imprecisely categorize, and Gryffindor is the closest available label." Another pause. "I'll tell you something I don't tell everyone. The last time two students arrived here already knowing each other the way you two do, already having built something between them before the world had a chance to shape them separately, it was a very long time ago. And what they built changed everything." A brief, old silence. "Be careful what you build, Tom Riddle." "I'm always careful," Tom said. "Yes," said the hat. "That's precisely what worries me." Then aloud, to the hall, Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table's response was enthusiastic in the diffuse way of a table that didn't quite know what they were cheering for but was prepared to cheer on principle. Tom handed the hat back to McGonagall, walked to the Gryffindor table, and sat down across from Harry. He looked at her. Gryffindor, he said, with the particular quality of someone who is trying not to appear as pleased as they are. The hat was persuasive, Tom said. The hat told you to come here? The hat made an argument, Tom said. I found it adequate. She looked at the table, the other students settling, the food about to arrive. It also said something about the last two students who arrived here already knowing each other. What did it say? That what they built changed everything. Harry was quiet for a moment. That's a lot of pressure to put on a sorting, he said. I thought so, Tom agreed. I intend to ignore it. Me too, Harry said. They looked at each other and she could see that he was not ignoring it and she was not ignoring it and they both knew this about each other, and that was completely fine. The food appeared. Ron Weasley descended on it with the enthusiasm of someone from a large family who had learned that hesitation was a tactical error at mealtimes. Hermione Granger appeared across the table and immediately began asking Harry questions about his experience with the sorting, with the focused conversational energy of someone who considers all information worth gathering. Tom served herself efficiently and ate and watched the hall. At the staff table, Dumbledore was watching them. Not overtly, he was talking to McGonagall, smiling, entirely engaged in the conversation, but she caught his gaze track to the Gryffindor table at intervals, with the particular pattern of someone checking something they are concerned about. She watched the pattern for several minutes and decoded it. He wasn't watching Harry, specifically. He wasn't watching her, specifically. He was watching them together. The gap between them across the table, which was two people who were used to being in close proximity giving each other appropriate space for a new context. The way they communicated in the intervals between other conversations. The thing that existed between them that she knew, from 2 years of examining it from every angle, that Dumbledore had had no prior reason to expect. She thought, he's recalculating. The variable he didn't account for is making itself known and he's trying to understand its implications. She thought, good. Let him wonder. Across the table, Harry was answering Hermione's questions with patient generosity and simultaneously stealing a roast potato from Ron's plate, which Ron apparently considered perfectly acceptable because he was doing the same to Harry. Tom watched this small domestic negotiation with something that wasn't quite a feeling and wasn't quite not, and turned back to the hall. The morning routine at Hogwarts established itself within a week with the satisfying efficiency of a well-designed system. Classes were broadly as Tom had expected. The material was first-year level, which meant she'd covered most of it 2 years ago, but the practical component was interesting because performing magic with a wand was genuinely different from the wandless work she and Harry had done, and the difference was worth understanding properly. Her wand was extraordinary. She'd known this from Ollivanders, but every day of using it confirmed it further, the precision it offered, the way it translated intent into effect with minimal loss, was far beyond the standard she gathered from watching her classmates work. She learned the gap between adequate and excellent and made careful note of everyone else's baseline. Transfiguration, first lesson, McGonagall's classroom. A match to a needle. Every other student in the room was still attempting the basic shape shift at the end of the hour. Tom had her needle at 6 minutes. She spent the remaining time working out whether she could vary the transformation, needle to pin, pin to hairclip to a small approximate key shape, using the same incantation with modified intentional direction. She could. The key shape was rough but structurally sound. McGonagall watched her from 3 desks away with an expression Tom had learned to read across the table at dinner, something carefully controlled that was, underneath, equal parts impressed and concerned. She came over at the end of class. "Miss Riddle," she said. "That was very impressive work." "Thank you, Professor." "The variations on the base transformation, where did you learn to attempt those?" I reasoned that if the incantation establishes the general principle and intent guides the specific application, the variable is intent rather than incantation, Tom said. I tested it. McGonagall looked at her for a moment. That reasoning took me 3 years of university-level study to arrive at, she said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite warmth and not quite alarm and was probably both. You reasoned it independently. I had good materials to work from, Tom said. Waffling's chapter on directed transfiguration was useful. You read the supplementary university texts? I read whatever was available. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. Then, please come and see me during office hours this week, Miss Riddle. I'd like to have a more thorough conversation. Of course, Tom said pleasantly. In Charms, Professor Flitwick nearly fell off his stack of books when Tom's Wingardium Leviosa lifted the feather clean to the ceiling on the first attempt and held it there with the precision of something pinned to a display board. He gave her 10 points, recomposed himself, and spent the rest of the lesson watching her with the specific attention of a specialist recognizing something they'd like to study more carefully. In potions, Snape. She'd been waiting for potions. She'd read Snape's background thoroughly, the Death Eater history, the turn, the double role, the complicated personal history with Harry's parents that ran through everything he did with the quality of an old wound that had healed wrong. She'd prepared a specific approach: be excellent, be quiet about it, don't perform, let the excellent speak and watch what he does. He walked in and his gaze went to Harry immediately. Tom watched his face. The familiar complicated expression from the staff table, layered, controlled, not fully readable. He looked away from Harry and began his speech about the subtlety of potions, and then he looked at Harry again while talking and said, Potter. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Harry said, without hesitation, draught of living death. One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. Snape's face did something very fast. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? Stomach of a goat. It's an antidote to most poisons. What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? There isn't one, Harry said. They're the same plant. Also known as aconite. The class was very quiet. Snape looked at Harry for a long moment. Apparently, he said, fame isn't everything. He moved on without giving points, which Tom noted was small and petty and entirely characteristic of a person conducting private emotional business in a professional context. But his posture had changed, fractionally, in a way she read as, this is not what I expected and I am processing it. When Snape came to Tom, he looked at her with the particular expression she'd noticed at the staff table, the one she hadn't fully decoded yet. Miss Riddle, he said. The composition of a standard Wiggenweld potion. She told him. Precisely, with the 3 most common substitutions for 4th-level ingredients and the effect of temperature variation on the catalytic process. Snape looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression, something more complicated than the Harry-related layers. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like recognition of a different kind. Full marks, he said, and moved on. She filed this under investigate further. Snape knew something about her beyond what was in the standard records. She intended to find out what. They stayed at the top of every class. Tom made no effort to conceal this. The hat had said be exactly what you are, and she had been doing that her entire life regardless of anyone's opinion, and she was not about to start performing ignorance for social comfort. Harry matched her in the practical sessions and came close enough in theory that she revised her reading lists to include more accessible entry points for things she'd assumed were obvious. The school noticed. The school had complicated feelings about noticing. The Slytherin students, particularly the senior years, who had a framework for evaluating people in terms of bloodline and allegiance, watched Tom with a mixture of territorial interest and confusion. She was a Slytherin name in a Gryffindor robe, which didn't compute correctly, and several of them made approaches in the first 2 weeks that she handled with the efficiency she brought to most social negotiations, precise, polite, and leaving no actual ground. Draco Malfoy had introduced himself on the first morning in Madame Malkin's. Tom had been buying replacement ink, Harry had been looking at Quidditch supplies, and had done so with the particular combination of studied ease and low-key condescension that characterized people who have been told from birth that they are important and have no internal check on this information. He'd looked at Harry's scar with avarice and at Tom with interest and said, "Riddle, you're Slytherin, surely," with the confidence of someone offering an invitation they assume will be accepted. Tom had looked at him with complete equanimity and said, "Gryffindor, actually," and watched his expression malfunction briefly before he reorganized it into something cooler. He'd made several more approaches since. She handled them the same way each time, not unfriendly, not interested, not movable. Harry didn't handle Malfoy with the same equanimity, which she found interesting. He was never aggressive, he didn't engage with the sneering about his clothes or his blood status with anything except a kind of bored patience. But there was a quality of "I see exactly what you are and I'm not impressed" that came off him in Malfoy's direction that was more pointed than his usual stillness, and Malfoy registered it and didn't like it, and their dislike of each other had the crisp mutual quality of two people who took one look and understood each other precisely and found the understanding unsatisfying. "You could be less obvious about it," Tom told Harry one evening in the common room, after a corridor exchange with Malfoy that had involved a brief but pointed staring contest. "I know," Harry said, without defensiveness. "But he's unkind to people he thinks he can be unkind to without consequence. I find that specifically annoying." Tom thought about this. "Yes," she admitted. "That's fair." "The Longbottom situation today," Harry said. "I saw," Tom said. She had, Malfoy and his companions backing Neville Longbottom into a corner near the greenhouses, Neville's combination of gentleness and poorly controlled magic making him a target of the specific type that predatory social structures always generated. She'd been 3 steps away and had watched Harry get between Malfoy and Longbottom with the simple, complete lack of drama of someone stepping in front of something they don't intend to let continue. No speech. No confrontation. Just, "This is not happening. Move." Malfoy had moved. "You didn't say anything," Tom observed. "Didn't need to." Tom considered this. She had, she would note internally and not aloud, felt something when she'd watched him step in front of Neville that she was still deciding what to call. "The Weasley twins found it very satisfying," she said. "They seem like useful people," Harry said. "Fred and George Weasley are going to be either very valuable or very chaotic," Tom said. "Possibly both simultaneously." "Definitely both," Harry said, with the certainty of someone who had been sharing a dormitory with Ron for a week and had heard extensive Weasley family background. He picked up his charms textbook and then looked at her. "What did McGonagall say? In the office hours meeting?" Tom had been to McGonagall's office hours twice now. The first time had been the post-transfiguration conversation, which had covered the range of her independent study with the specific thoroughness of a teacher who wanted to understand exactly what she was dealing with. The second had been 3 days later, and that conversation had been different. "She knows about the Dumbledore visit to Wolves," Tom said. She knew about it already, apparently, she was told it was a standard visit. She didn't know about Harry's placement with the Dursleys being a deliberate choice. She thought it was simply necessity. Harry looked up from the charms book. She didn't know. She genuinely didn't know, Tom said. "I could tell. When certain information was implied without being stated directly, her reaction was real. Not performed." Tom looked at the fire, thinking. She's loyal to Dumbledore. But she's loyal to principal first and person second, or she would be if she understood the full picture. "You're thinking about telling her." "I'm thinking about what telling her would accomplish," Tom said. "There's a difference." She turned away from the fire. "What I know about Dumbledore I can't prove. Flamel's report proves the fragment exists but not that Dumbledore knows, though anyone applying reasonable inference to 10 years of circumstances would conclude that he does. The financial records from Gringotts prove the estate mismanagement, but Dumbledore could argue he was operating within the custodial framework. Every piece of evidence I have is real and meaningful, but none of it is the kind of clean proof that forces action. So we wait, Harry said. We gather, Tom said. There's a difference. Ron Weasley was across the common room playing chess with Seamus Finnegan and losing, which was apparently uncharacteristic enough to be generating commentary. Hermione was on the sofa beside Tom's chair with 3 books open and was doing the multi-book cross-referencing thing that Tom recognized and found professionally gratifying to observe in someone else. She'd marked Hermione Granger as a significant resource in the first week, the girl's capacity for thorough research and her ruthless honesty about what she didn't know yet were qualities Tom valued highly. Hermione, Tom said. Hermione looked up immediately. Yes? Your essay on the switching spell. Your conclusion about unintended transference was interesting. Could you expand on the reasoning? Hermione lit up the way she always did when someone asked her about reasoning rather than just results. She was mid-sentence when a paper airplane flew across the common room from the direction of the notice board and landed in Tom's lap. Tom opened it. It was from Snape. A note, in his precise handwriting, requesting her presence in his office after dinner the following day. It said, at the bottom, in a slightly different hand, slightly, very slightly, less controlled, alone. Harry, who'd leaned over to read it, sat back. He's been watching you all week, he said. I know. You know why? Not yet, Tom said. But I expect to find out tomorrow. She folded the note and put it in her pocket and looked at Hermione, who had paused out of courtesy. You were saying, the unintended transference. Hermione resumed. Tom listened and thought about Snape, and thought about the way he'd said full marks in potions not with the automatic teacher acknowledging excellence register but with something more, something that had recognized her specifically, not just her ability. She thought about what he'd known and when. She thought she was about to find out. Snape's office was underground, cold, and lined with things in jars that Tom looked at with academic interest. She sat in the chair across from his desk and waited with her hands in her lap and watched him decide how to begin the conversation. He stood rather than sitting. He looked at her for a long moment, and the complicated layered expression from the great hall was there in full. I knew someone, he said, named Tom Riddle. You knew the Dark Lord as a young man, Tom said. He went very still. You know a great deal. I've done extensive research, Tom said. You were recruited by him before his first fall. You were also recruited by Dumbledore. You've been operating as a double agent for the better part of a decade. She kept her tone even. I'm not bringing this up to threaten you or to leverage it. I'm bringing it up because you know things about the original Tom Riddle's history and capabilities that are directly relevant to what I'm investigating. Snape looked at her for a long time. The controlled expression worked very hard. She waited and let it work. You're not him, he said finally. No, Tom said. I'm a girl born in 1980 to a Muggle father and a gaunt mother. The soul magic is different, the Slytherin lineage is the same, the name is the same. She paused. Though I intend to change the name eventually. Tom Riddle is not who I plan to be. Who do you plan to be? Someone better, she said simply. Someone who learned from his mistakes. Snape made a sound that might have been something like a laugh, quickly suppressed. He sat down. He looked at her with a different quality of attention, less guarded now, or guarded differently. What mistakes, specifically? All of them, Tom said. The ideology. The cowardice of hiding behind a different name and face. The sycophants. The number of Horcruxes, she saw him go sharp at the word. Yes. I know about those too. You're 11 years old, Snape said. Yes. And I know about Horcruxes. And I know about the soul fragment in Harry Potter's scar. And I know what Dumbledore is planning to do about it. She held his gaze. Do you know what Dumbledore is planning? Snape's face told her the answer before he said anything. It went through several stages very fast: denial, consideration, something that might have been the arrival of a thought he hadn't let himself complete before. He would never, he started. He has always, Tom said, gently. The question is whether he's told himself a story about it that he believes, which I think he probably has, because he's genuinely not a cruel man. He believes the outcome justifies the method. She reached into her pocket and slid Flamel's copied report across the desk. Flamel wrote this in November 1981. Sent copies to Dumbledore and to the Potter solicitors. The solicitor's copy went into a sealed vault. I believe Dumbledore's copy informed his entire approach to Harry for the last decade. Snape read it. He read it with the complete absorption of someone who is processing something that is changing the architecture of what they understand about a situation they thought they'd mapped. When he finished, he set it down and looked at it for a moment without speaking. He knows, Snape said. Not a question. He knows, Tom said. And he's been preparing for a specific ending. And you, Snape said, looking at her. What are you preparing for? A different one, Tom said. Snape was quiet. The jars in their shelves caught the candlelight. Somewhere in the corridor outside, the sound of students passing, distant and ordinary. What do you need? He said. Tom held his gaze. She'd been prepared for several responses: resistance, anger, deflection, and had not quite allowed herself to prepare for this one, which was the most useful possible answer, because preparation based on hope was not her methodology. Information, she said. About the stone. About what Dumbledore has set up in the third-floor corridor. About what's coming this year. She paused. And I need you to continue exactly as you have been, as far as Dumbledore is concerned. I need him not to know we've had this conversation. You want me to lie to Dumbledore, Snape said. You've been lying to the Dark Lord for years, Tom said. Dumbledore should be less difficult. Snape looked at her for another long moment. Then, very drilly, with the quality of a man who has just discovered he's been outmaneuvered by an 11-year-old and has decided to find it, on reflection, somewhat impressive rather than infuriating, indeed. The third-floor corridor was locked, but that was a technicality. Tom assessed it with Harry the following Saturday, standing at the door while the rest of the school was at the first Quidditch match of the season, and what the door offered was a single locking charm of moderate complexity, and behind it, per Snape's information, a trapdoor guarded by multiple layers of protection designed by the various heads of department. Fluffy first, Hagrid's three-headed dog. Then a sequence of enchantments. Then the stone. But also, per Snape, on the other side of the Quirrell situation. Tom had known about Quirrell from her research. The obvious thing about the defense against the dark arts teacher, the nervous stammer, the purple turban, the quality of someone performing their own performance, was obvious because she'd been looking at it with the right analytical framework. There was a second presence in that classroom. She felt it every lesson, the way she'd felt the resonance with Harry, the way she felt the Horcrux architecture, deep magic, old and purposeful and not Quirrell's. She'd told Harry in the second week. Harry had said, the turban. She'd said, presumably yes. They'd looked at each other and silently agreed to gather more information before acting. Now, standing at the third-floor door on a Saturday with the school empty around them, Harry said, he'll try to get to the stone before the year's out. Yes, Tom said. Unless we change the conditions. How? She looked at the door. By being ready. Not by stopping him now. If we go in and take the stone, we haven't solved anything. Voldemort's fragment still exists, somewhere. He'll find another way. What we need is the confrontation, but on our terms, not Dumbledore's. She turned away from the door. Snape said Dumbledore expects to be away in December. The attempt will likely come then. He'll leave on purpose, Harry said. To create the window. Probably. She started walking back. Which means when it happens, Dumbledore wants to be summoned back just barely too late to have been the one who stopped it. He wants a student to have stopped it. She glanced at Harry. He wants you to have stopped it. That's the beginning of the story he's building. Harry was quiet for a moment. What if we stop it in a way he didn't plan for? That's exactly what we're going to do, Tom said. Tom. What? When we go down there. When Quirrell comes and we have to deal with him, whatever's on the back of his head, it's going to respond to what I carry. To the fragment. He said it with his characteristic calm, but she heard what was underneath it, not fear, but awareness. The specific awareness of someone who has looked at their own situation without flinching and knows exactly what they're dealing with. Last time, in Godric's Hollow, the fragment recognized Voldemort and it was like calling to like and it destroyed his body. I know, Tom said. I don't know if it'll try the same thing again. It won't, Tom said. Because last time there was no alternative. This time there is. She looked at him directly. I've been working on the extraction methodology. I know what needs to happen. I know what the mechanism is. She kept her voice flat and factual, the way she handled things that mattered most to her. When we go down there, I'll be ready. You focus on Quirrell. I'll focus on the fragment. Harry looked at her. You've solved it. I've solved enough of it, Tom said, which was honest. It's a surgical extraction, theoretically. Not painless. But survivable. She paused. Very survivable. I've been very careful. I know you have, Harry said. He held her gaze. Okay. That was all. Just, okay. The same way he'd always answered the things she told him she was going to do, not with doubt, not with gratitude, just with the clean acknowledgement of someone who has long since decided to trust what they trust completely. Tom turned back toward the Gryffindor Tower. Above them the castle was full of the quiet of an afternoon with most of it elsewhere, the stone cool and old and humming with accumulated magic. She thought, December. 6 weeks. She thought about Dumbledore at the staff table, watching them, recalculating. She thought about the stone and Quirrell and the fragment and the architecture and all the pieces on the board, and she thought about what she knew and what Dumbledore knew and what Voldemort's ghost fragment knew, and she thought about the variable that none of them had accounted for, which was not power exactly and not love exactly and not strategy exactly but something that contained all three and was, at its core, simply the fact of two extraordinary people who had found each other on a pavement at 9 years old and built something together that had no precedent and no category and that was now, 2 years later, walking toward the end of a story someone else had written with the absolute intention of rewriting the ending. Harry was beside her, and the resonance between them was steady and present and clear as a bell. Let him try, she thought again. It was becoming something like a refrain. Let all of them try. Chapter 5. The Mirror. December arrived at Hogwarts the way it always did, sudden and total, as if the castle had been waiting for an excuse to become something from a painting. Snow on the battlements, frost on the inside of the tower windows in the mornings, the great hall decorated with 12 enormous Christmas trees that smelled genuinely of pine rather than the synthetic approximation Harry had grown up with at Privet Drive. He noticed the smell specifically because he noticed most things specifically, and because the Dursleys had used artificial trees, and because the gap between that and this was a good measurement of how far he traveled. Most students were going home for Christmas. The common room thinned out through the second week of December like water draining from a basin, first the ones with long journeys, then the ones who'd been on the fence and decided family was worth the trip, until by December 21st, the Gryffindor Tower held Harry, Tom, Hermione, who had elected to stay on the grounds that her parents were going abroad and the castle library was more interesting than an empty house, the Weasley twins, who were staying for reasons they described as research opportunities, in a tone that promised something structural would be on fire by Christmas morning, and a handful of others scattered across years. Ron had gone home. He'd invited Harry with a genuineness that Harry appreciated, and Harry had declined with equal genuineness, and they'd parted at the barrier with the specific warmth of people who have worked out that they like each other and don't need to perform it. Harry spent the morning of the 21st in the library with Tom, working through the extraction methodology she'd been refining since October. It was not comfortable reading. The theory was elegant. Tom's theories always had the quality of being simultaneously elegant and ice-cold, but the practical component required Harry to sit with a document that described in precise terms what was living in his scar and what removing it would involve. He read it with the same approach he brought to everything, completely, and then again, and then he asked questions. The pain component, he said. Unavoidable, Tom said. She was sitting across from him at the back table, the one they'd been using since before September, which had acquired the quality of their space in a way that the library staff accommodated without comment. The fragment has been anchored in the scar tissue since 1981. It's integrated. Pulling it free will feel like the equivalent of removing something that has been growing in a wound. Will it affect you? She looked at him. What? The resonance. You've said the resonance goes both ways. When you pull the fragment, will you feel it? Tom was quiet for a moment. He watched her decide whether to answer fully or partially and watched her decide on fully, which she always did in the end. Possibly, she said. The architecture in me and the fragment in you are sympathetically linked. What affects one may be felt by the other. She met his eyes. I'm not concerned about it. I know you're not, Harry said. I'm concerned about it. You don't need to be. I can be concerned about things I can't prevent, Harry said, and still proceed. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Tom looked at him with a specific expression that meant she was filing something. She did this sometimes, put things he said into some internal catalog she maintained about the world and the people in it and the ways things worked. He'd gotten used to it. He found it, if he was honest, something close to flattering, in the way that having someone's full attention was always flattering when the attention was genuine. The extraction, Tom said, returning to the document, requires 3 things. First, my focus on the specific location of the fragment. Second, your conscious cooperation. You'll need to not resist the process. The fragment will resist on its own, and if you add resistance, it becomes substantially more difficult. She turned a page. Third, a sufficient magical environment. The resonance between us amplifies both of our capabilities. What I can do alone is good. What I can do in direct proximity to you is better. How much better? I haven't been able to quantify it precisely because most of our tests have been practical rather than measured, Tom said, which was as close as she ever came to admitting a methodological gap, but empirically, every piece of magic I've performed in your immediate vicinity since September has been approximately 20% more effective than the equivalent performed alone. You have the same effect on me that a wand has on wandless magic. Amplification. Direction. Efficiency. Harry absorbed this. And I have the same effect on you? Yes. Your instinctive accuracy improves. Your stasis effect is stronger. The ambient protections extend further. She paused. We are better together than we are separately. This is not a sentimental observation. It's empirical. I know, Harry said. I just wanted to hear you say it. Tom looked at him and the corner of her mouth did the thing that wasn't quite a smile but was the thing that came before smiles on her face. Very funny, she said. I'm completely serious, Harry said. She turned back to the document. He watched the corner of her mouth and thought, December 21st. Snape told her Dumbledore leaves tonight. He'd known for 3 days. She'd told him the moment Snape's information arrived, because that was how they operated, all information shared, all variables visible, no decisions made unilaterally about anything that affected both of them. He appreciated this with a depth he didn't generally express because the depth was obvious and expressing the obvious was inefficient, and they were both, in their different ways, people who found efficiency beautiful. The library was quiet around them. Outside the high windows, snow was falling in the fat deliberate way it did when it intended to settle. Hermione was 3 tables away with her characteristic arrangement of books and supplementary notes, occasionally glancing over at them with the look she'd been giving them since October, a combination of curiosity and something that might have been wistfulness, the expression of someone who is very good at observing things and has observed something she doesn't have a complete framework for yet. She'd asked Tom about it once, in November, in the direct way Hermione asked about most things: "What is it between you and Harry? Are you?" Tom had looked at her for a moment and then said, "Precisely, we understand each other completely." And Hermione had considered this and nodded slowly and not pushed further, which Harry thought showed excellent judgment. He closed the extraction document. "Tonight," he said. "Tonight," Tom confirmed. "What time do you think?" "Quirrell teaches his last class at 4. He'll eat dinner to maintain appearances. He'll go between 9 and 10, late enough that the corridors should be clear, early enough that if something goes wrong he has time to recover." She turned a page in a different book without looking up. "We'll go at 8:30. Ahead of him. We'll be at the mirror before he arrives. We'll know the layout. We'll have the advantage of the ground." She finally looked up. "I want to see the mirror before everything else happens." Harry looked at her. He'd read about the Mirror of Erised in one of Tom's texts, a brief reference, more archival than instructional, describing it as one of the most magically significant objects created in the last 5 centuries and also one of the most dangerous, specifically because its danger was entirely internal. It showed the viewer their deepest desire, and it had driven people mad by the specific cruelty of showing them something they could look at but never have. "Because it's going to be down there," he said. "Because Dumbledore put it there as one of the protections," Tom said. "Which means he put a test of desire between the stone and whoever comes for it. He's betting that the Dark Lord's desire for the stone is what will stop him. The mirror won't give the stone to someone who wants to use it." She paused. "But we need to see it before Quirrell does. Before Dumbledore, ideally." "What are you expecting to see?" Tom was quiet for a moment. It was a more internal quiet than her usual thinking silences. "I don't know," she said, and there was something slightly different about saying it, a quality of genuine uncertainty she rarely permitted herself. "I've tried to reason about what I desire most and I find I can't construct a clean answer." She looked at the window and the snow. "That concerns me somewhat." "Why?" "Because I've always been able to construct clean answers about what I want," she said. "It's one of the things I rely on about myself. Clarity of intent." She looked back at the table. "Since September, the clarity has been less clean." Harry didn't say anything for a moment. "Then, maybe that's not a problem. It might be a problem if the mirror shows me something I haven't prepared for and I have to process it while also managing an encounter with a partial shade of the most dangerous dark wizard of the last century." "Fair," Harry admitted. He thought about it. "What do you think I'll see?" Tom looked at him directly. "What do you think you'll see?" "My family," Harry said. "Parents. Maybe, people. A house. Something that looks like what home is supposed to look like." He said it without particular sadness, which was a thing about Harry that Tom had catalogued early and filed under remarkable. He discussed his losses with the same clarity he discussed everything else, not because they didn't affect him but because he'd integrated them rather than bracketed them. "I've thought about it. I've always thought what I want most is a place to belong. People who chose me." Tom was looking at him with the layered expression. "The people who chose you," she said, carefully. "Would you include current people in that description? Or is it specifically about the people you've lost?" Harry held her gaze. "Both," he said simply. Tom looked at the table. She straightened a corner of the document unnecessarily. Harry watched her do this and recognized it as the paper-smoothing equivalent of the thing she did when she was navigating something that required more honesty than her natural caution liked. 8:30, she said. I'll meet you at the stairs, Harry said. The castle at 8:30 on a December night was a different thing from the castle during the day. The day version was populated and purposeful, the night version was enormous and old in a way that the presence of hundreds of students normally muffled. Walking through it now, under the invisibility cloak, he'd brought it without telling Tom and she'd looked at it and said good with the satisfaction of someone who'd already expected exactly this. Harry felt the castle's accumulated centuries with a clarity that was almost like hearing. The magic in the stone. The weight of it. Tom walked beside him under the cloak, and he was aware of her with the same specific ambient awareness he'd been aware of her with since 1989, the warmth of her presence in his peripheral consciousness, the steady hum of her magical field adjacent to his. 2 years ago he hadn't had a word for it. Now he had a framework, a theory, a carefully researched technical description that was entirely accurate and also, somehow, entirely insufficient. He thought about the mirror. He thought about what he'd said, people who chose me. He thought about Tom, sitting on the pavement in 1989, correcting his map of Privet Drive and telling him about the wizarding world with the directness of someone who has decided, for reasons they haven't fully explained, to give you something important. She'd chosen, on a Tuesday in August 1989, to sit down next to a strange boy on the pavement and tell him the truth about what they both were. And she'd come back. And she'd kept coming back. And she'd brought books and done research and fixed his glasses and sat in the cold and argued theory and looked up when he walked into rooms and said we instead of I without making it a declaration. He thought, if the mirror shows me what I most want, and what I most want is people who chose me, the mirror is going to be very straightforward about this. He didn't say any of this. Tom was walking beside him with her jaw set slightly, the way it went when she was thinking hard about something she hadn't resolved, and he left her to it. 3rd floor. The door. Tom put her hand flat on it and the locking charm dissolved like breath on glass. She didn't even fully focus on it, just touched it and it opened, which was the particular kind of casual competence that had stopped surprising Harry sometime around late October. He'd watched her open 7 locked things since September and each time the magic responded to her like a formality being waived. Inside, darkness first, then the low sound of something breathing in the dark. Then the enormous shape of Fluffy resolving from the shadows, 3 heads, each approximately the size of a small car, currently all asleep, which Harry noted meant something was already making them sleep. A small harp in the corner, still moving, Quirrell's contribution or a previous visitor's. Tom looked at the harp and at the trapdoor and at the sleeping dog and said, quietly, someone's been here already. Quirrell? Can't tell yet. The harp charm is recent but, she crouched near the trapdoor. The catch is already open. Someone went through. Harry looked at her. She looked at him. We go through, Harry said. Yes. The drop through the trapdoor was into Devil's Snare, which Tom identified in the air on the way down and they both went still and let it cover them and felt it retreat from their body heat, Tom's wand work on the temperature, quick and precise, making both of them warmer than the plant preferred. They landed. The next room, winged keys. The correct one was obvious to Harry in the same way directions were obvious, he felt it, the specific magical resonance of the key that was keyed to the next door, and he pointed and Tom sent a localized stasis effect at it and it dropped neatly into her hand. She looked at it and then at him. You felt that, she said. Instinct, he said. Yes, she said, with a quality of satisfaction she didn't try to conceal. The chess room, the giant pieces stood waiting. Tom looked at the board for approximately 4 seconds and then moved through it in 7 moves with the systematic efficiency of someone who has played enough chess to see 3 games ahead, touching each piece and conveying intent, the pieces responding to her as if she were the player they'd been waiting for. Harry followed her path. The White Queen turned its head and watched Tom with what might have been approval. The troll was already unconscious. Already dealt with, which meant whoever was ahead of them had been through recently and quickly. The potions room, Snape's contribution, a logic puzzle framing 7 bottles. Tom picked up the note and read it and solved it without the pause Harry would have needed. She did it the way she did calculations in her head, which was immediately and without visible effort. She handed him the correct bottle. He drank it. She drank the forward passage bottle herself. Tom, Harry said. I know, she said, already moving toward the black flame ahead. He followed. The final chamber was large and cold and full of a specific quality of quiet that was different from the quiet of the other rooms. This quiet was intentional. It felt like a held breath. The mirror of Ariste stood against the far wall. It was taller than Harry had expected, nearly 3 times his height, ornate gold frame, the inscription running along the top, Ariste stra eru oit ube kafru oit onwosi. He looked at it and felt the mirror's magic the same way he felt the castle's magic, old and present and deeply intentional. Standing in front of it, back to them, was Professor Quirrell. He was very still. His head was tilted slightly upward, looking into the mirror, and the quality of his stillness was wrong, not the stillness of a person absorbed in what they're seeing but the stillness of a person trying to extract information from something that isn't cooperating. He hadn't heard them come in. Tom put her hand briefly on Harry's arm and they both stopped. She was reading the situation, Harry felt her doing it, the quick comprehensive scan that took in all available variables before committing to anything. He was doing the same thing but faster and less systematically, the way his instinct worked, a full picture arriving all at once rather than being assembled piece by piece. What he got from the full picture, Quirrell frustrated. The stone not obtained. The mirror not giving what it was being asked for. And something else, a pressure in the room that wasn't coming from Quirrell or from the mirror or from the stone walls, a third presence, the one he'd been feeling in defense against the dark arts lessons since September, the one that made the scar on his forehead warm and directional. The fragment in his scar knew what was on the back of Quirrell's head. It reached toward it the way a compass reached toward north, not a pull he felt externally but an internal orientation, a knowing. He stood in the room and felt Voldemort's fragment inside him and felt what remained of Voldemort on the other side of the room, and the feeling between them was recognition. Tom felt it too. He could tell from the way her hand on his arm tightened for 1 second and then released. He stepped out from under the invisibility cloak. Quirrell turned. The stammer was gone. Whatever performance the nervous teacher had maintained in the corridors and classrooms of Hogwarts was entirely absent here. Quirrell's face was empty of the anxious academic facade, replaced by something sharper and considerably less human in its focus. His eyes found Harry with the immediate precision of someone who had been looking for him specifically. Harry Potter, Quirrell said. How interesting. Professor, Harry said pleasantly. Quirrell looked at Tom, still at the edge of the room. His expression did something that wasn't quite recognition and wasn't quite confusion, a recalculation in real time. And you're, the Riddle girl. His voice changed slightly on the last 2 words, and Harry felt the pressure in the room shift, the third presence reacting. Yes, Tom said. She stepped fully into the room. She was carrying her wand but not raised, at her side, easy, her posture completely unhurried. She looked at Quirrell the way she looked at everything she'd assessed and found comprehensible. I'd like to talk to whoever is actually in control of this conversation, if you don't mind. Quirrell's expression twisted. Then his body went very still, a different kind of still from before, the involuntary stillness of something happening from the inside rather than the outside, and he began, slowly, to turn around. Harry had been expecting the turban. He had not quite prepared for the specific quality of what was underneath it, the pale, sunken face growing from the back of Quirrell's head, the eyes red as the book said and the presence coming off it like heat from a wound. Lord Voldemort, reduced to this, parasitic, hostile, ancient with fury. But not what he'd been. Harry could feel the difference immediately. Whatever had done this to the most feared dark wizard of the century had been thorough. This wasn't diminishment, this was a ruin. Power still present the way a burnt building was still standing, but the structure was compromised in ways that were visible from the outside. Harry Potter, Voldemort said. His voice was two voices at once, quirls underneath and something ragged and cold and old on top, like paper over stone. We meet again. For the first time, technically, Harry said. I was too young to remember the last one. You have something that belongs to me, Voldemort said. The scar pulsed, warm, specific, oriented. Harry felt the fragment's response to its maker and kept his breathing even. You left it behind, Harry said. That's generally how things stop belonging to people. Tell me, Tom said, from beside Harry, her voice completely conversational, how does it feel? Knowing the methodology worked once and failed catastrophically the second time. She looked at Voldemort with the specific focused interest she directed at problems she found genuinely puzzling. One Horcrux survived your death. Barely. The rest, the ones you made after, I've been tracing them. This wasn't entirely true yet, but she said it with the precision of someone who was going to make it true shortly. The architecture was unsound. You understand why, I imagine. Something moved through Voldemort's face that Harry read as rage being managed, the specific management of someone who cannot afford to lose control because what control they still have is all they have. A child, Voldemort said, speaking to me about architecture. I'm speaking to you about your mistakes, Tom said. Because they're instructive. You designed a system of personal persistence and then you panicked and kept adding to it until the original structure was barely coherent. 7 Horcruxes, and you still ended up on the back of a man's head in a dungeon, asking a mirror to give you what you can't take yourself. She tilted her head. What you wanted was permanence. What you got was fragility. The red eyes moved between Tom and Harry. The calculation happening behind them was visible. Harry could see it, the same way he could see the calculation behind Dumbledore's warmth. Working out the variables. Trying to understand what had walked into this room. You know about Horcruxes, Voldemort said, and the voice had changed, the rage still there but something running alongside it, cold and curious. A first-year student. A girl named Riddle. A pause. My bloodline. The same bloodline, yes, Tom said. Different branch. Different choices. She looked at him directly. I'm not your heir. I'm not your successor. I'm not going to pick up what you dropped. And yet here you are, Voldemort said softly, in a room with the stone, with knowledge you should not have, with the boy who lived beside you. What are you, then? Better, Tom said, and said it the way she said everything, factually, without vanity, the conclusion of an honest analysis. Voldemort's attention shifted fully to Harry. The scar pulsed harder. Harry felt the fragment straining toward its origin the way a splinter strains toward the surface of skin, wanting out, wanting reunion. Give me the boy, Voldemort said to Tom. Just the boy. What I want is in his scar. I have no quarrel with you. I know, Tom said. That's also a mistake. Harry felt Tom move before she moved, the ambient awareness, the warm presence in his peripheral consciousness stepping into a different configuration. She stepped forward, not toward Voldemort but toward Harry, and she put her hand on his arm and he felt the resonance between them, the deep magic, the sympathetic architecture, accelerate the way it did when they worked together in the park or the library, becoming something more than the sum of its parts. Now, Tom said quietly. Harry understood. He didn't reach for his wand. He reached inward, the same interior motion he'd been practicing since they'd worked out what it was, the reach toward the specific site of the fragment with the specific intent of opening rather than resisting. Like opening a hand. Like releasing something held for so long you'd forgotten you were holding it. Tom reached too. He felt her reach, felt it in the resonance between them, her precision and his instinct engaged simultaneously on the same target, the same precise point in the architecture of his scar, pulling in the same direction with the specific cooperative force they'd developed over 2 years of working together until their magical instincts had partially learned each other's language. It hurt. He'd been told it would hurt. He'd known it would hurt. This was not a surprise and therefore it was manageable. It was the specific kind of sharp, structural pain of something being extracted from where it had grown for 10 years, and he breathed through it the way Tom had told him to, kept his hands still, kept his intent clear, kept the cooperation intact. Voldemort made a sound. Across the room, in Quirrell's body, the red eyes went wide with an expression Harry had not expected, not fury. Shock. The fragment came free. It was not visible, it didn't appear in the air, didn't materialize, wasn't the kind of thing that could be seen with ordinary sight. But Harry felt it go with the absolute certainty of someone who has been carrying something wrong in their body for 10 years and suddenly isn't, a subtraction so definitive it was briefly disorienting, the scar on his forehead blazing white-hot and then going entirely cold. Tom gasped, the only sound she made, quick and sharp, there and gone. The resonance between them flared enormous for 1 second and then settled, different, reconfigured around its new shape. Voldemort screamed. It was not Quirrell who screamed, or not primarily, it was the thing on the back of his head, the ancient ruined remnant, and the scream was the sound of something that had been reaching for a piece of itself for 10 years and had watched it be taken away instead of returned. Harry was already moving. Tom was already moving. They were side by side and the magic between them was up and active and everything that had been building in the ambient field since they'd walked into the room was now simply available, ready, shaped by 2 years of working together until the collaboration was automatic. Quirrell raised his hand, Voldemort's control, Voldemort's magic, and it was still formidable even in this diminished state, and Harry met it with the stasis effect and Tom met it with a precise counterbarrier and the magic between them folded the attack back with a completeness that left a moment of silence in the room. Quirrell's face showed agony. The conflict of two magical forces working through one body, Voldemort's push and the doubled field of Tom and Harry's defense, was visibly destroying him from the inside, the same way the books described it, the same way Harry had always known proximity to him was dangerous for the host. Tom, Harry said. I see it, she said. They both let go at the same time. Not the defense, they kept the defense. What they let go was the pressure of active engagement, the magical push, and simply held the field and waited, and let Quirrell's body do what it was going to do without the additional stress of their magic fighting his. It took 30 seconds. At the end of 30 seconds, Quirrell collapsed. And the pale face on the back of his head tried to hold together and failed, the remnant that had been Voldemort, robbed of the fragment in Harry's scar and without a proper body and facing a magical force that was 2 people rather than 1, dissolved the way smoke dissolves when a window opens. Not destroyed. Tom had been very clear about this in their planning, not destroyed. Dispersed. The piece that remained would persist, somewhere, in some weakened form, until someone gave it the support it needed to consolidate again. But not here, not tonight, not in this room. The chamber was quiet. Harry exhaled. Beside him, Tom was breathing steadily, her wand held at her side, looking at the place where Quirrell lay and at the air above him where nothing remained. Her face was the stripped-down version, the one she had when she'd been working at full capacity and hadn't yet put the performance back on. The fragment, Harry said. Gone from the scar, Tom confirmed. I'm containing it currently. She touched the pocket where her wand was. Temporarily. We'll discuss the permanent solution tomorrow. Harry looked at her. He understood what she meant. The extraction had required somewhere for the fragment to go, not back to Voldemort, not dissipated, but held. The temporary containment was hers. He looked at her with a specific concern that he decided to file and revisit when they were not standing in a dungeon. Okay, he said. Don't look at me like that, she said. I'm not looking at you any particular way. You have a specific look for when you're worried about me and I'd appreciate you not, mirror, Harry said. She turned. The mirror of Ariste was still there, enormous and quiet against the wall. Neither of them had looked at it properly since entering the room. They'd been entirely focused on Quirrell and the work between them. Now, in the aftermath of everything, the room was still and the mirror was simply present, the gold frame catching the cold light from the ceiling, the inscription running along the top. Tom walked toward it first. Harry stayed back. He watched her approach it with the same systematic attention she brought to every new thing, controlled, methodical, ready to assess and categorize what she found. She stopped in front of it and looked. Her face went very still. Not the controlled stillness she used as a performance. The actual stillness, the rare, unmanaged version that he'd only seen a handful of times. He watched it for a moment and then looked at the mirror himself, from where he stood. He saw himself. And Tom beside him. And around them, imprecise and warm in the way that dreams were imprecise and warm, the shape of something he could feel the meaning of before he fully decoded it, a place. A table with people at it. The specific quality of a room that had a history of being lived in, that had accumulated the comfortable evidence of people choosing to be there repeatedly. His parents somewhere in the background, present the way loved people were present even when they were gone. And Tom, not beside him as she currently was but in the scene, embedded in it, hers by choice and design rather than by circumstance, the same specific way she'd always been present, chosen and complete and exactly herself. He kept his expression even. He looked away from the mirror and looked at Tom. She was still looking at her own reflection. Her hands were loose at her sides and her jaw was not set, the small muscle she kept controlled there was released, and her face had a quality he'd only seen once before, in Ragnar's office when she'd been reading Flammel's report, when she'd been angry enough that the anger had briefly overridden all her management. The quality of something true happening underneath the surface regardless of what the surface intended. Tom, he said quietly. She didn't answer for a moment. Then, the mirror is cruel, she said. Her voice was even. The evenness cost something. What did you see? She was quiet. Tom. She turned away from the mirror. She looked at him directly, the way she only looked at him when she decided something required full honesty rather than the managed version. I saw the architecture complete, she said. The work. The theory, fully realized. Permanence. Everything I've been building. She paused. And you in it. Not adjacent. Not, nearby. In it. As part of the structure. Another pause. Not as a Horcrux. That's not what it was. It was something else. Something I don't have a precise name for. Harry held her gaze. The mirror shows you what you want most, he said. I'm aware of what the mirror does, Tom said. Then you know what the mirror just told you. She looked at him with the layered expression, the complicated one with multiple components running simultaneously, and underneath all the layers there was something very clear and very simple that she was choosing not to look away from, which was new. Tom didn't look away from things as a general principle, but she also had a history of making certain things available for examination only on her own terms and at her own timing. The mirror, she said, carefully, showed me what I want. I'm not prepared to suggest that what I want is always what is appropriate. Or possible. Or, Tom, Harry said. What? I'm going to tell you what I saw. She went very still. He told her. He kept it brief because that was how things worked between them, brevity was efficient and they were both efficient, but he told her completely, the scene in the mirror with the people and the place and the quality of it, and he told her specifically about seeing her in it, embedded and present and chosen. She looked at him for a long time. The mirror might be, she started. Showing us our deepest desire, Harry said. Yes. I know. That's the thing about the mirror. He took a step toward her. It's not a trick. It doesn't lie. That's also what the books say. Tom stood her ground. She stood it with her characteristic absolute completeness. There was never anything tentative about Tom Riddle, even in moments like this one. She looked at him with the full weight of her attention and said, "Precisely, if I allowed myself to." She stopped. Started again. "I've spent a long time being very clear about what I want and why I want it. That clarity has been useful. Essential." She searched for the word. "Protective." "I know," Harry said. "And in the last 2 years the clarity has been getting less neat," she said. "I mentioned this to you. In the library. I said it concerned me. I remember. You said maybe it wasn't a problem," she said. "I didn't fully agree with you at the time. What about now?" She looked at him. The mirror was behind her and the cold dungeon light was around them and Quirrell was on the floor and the stone was somewhere nearby and outside, above them, the castle and the snow and the whole enormous complicated world they'd been navigating their way through since they were 9 years old. "Now," Tom said, "I think you might have been right." Harry closed the remaining distance between them. She didn't step back. She never stepped back from anything. He put his hands on either side of her face, carefully, the way you handled something important, and the resonance between them, which had been the deep background constant of the last 2 years, was suddenly everything, warm and present and steady as the architecture she'd been building, the one the mirror had shown her, the one that had him in it. He kissed her. She kissed him back with the same precision she brought to everything, the same focused completeness, and after a moment her hands came up and she held on to his jacket with both fists, just the material, just something to hold, and he thought, 2 years ago on a pavement in Little Whinging, her magic reached for mine and mine reached back, and neither of us has let go since. When they pulled back she was looking at him with the stripped-down face, and he was close enough now to see what was in it clearly, the thing she'd been calling unclear for months, the thing that had been making her clarity less neat, the thing the mirror had named for her whether she was ready for it to or not. "I still don't have a precise word for it," she said. "We'll find one," Harry said. "We're good at finding things." Tom's mouth did the thing that came before smiles. Then, gradually, it became the real smile, the rare one, the one he'd been collecting instances of for 2 years the way some people collected specific and irreplaceable things. "Yes," she said. "We are." Behind them, the mirror stood with its inscription running along the top. "I show not your face but your heart's desire." The stone was still hidden in it, Dumbledore's cleverest protection, hidden from people who wanted to use it, visible only to someone who wanted it without wanting anything from it. They hadn't come for the stone. Neither of them had given it more than passing attention. Which was probably, Harry thought, exactly why they could see it. The small red stone gleamed in the mirror's reflection, visible in the pocket of the reflected Tom. She looked down at her actual pocket. The stone was there. She looked up at him with wide eyes, genuinely wide, genuinely surprised, which was so rare that he registered it like a weather event. I wasn't trying to, I know," Harry said. Tom took the stone out of her pocket and held it in her palm and looked at it with the comprehensive attention of someone who has just had something profound happen and is deciding what to do about it. The philosopher's stone. Nicholas Flamel's stone. The thing Dumbledore had set up an entire obstacle course and a mirror trap to protect. "We can't keep it," Harry said. "Obviously we can't keep it," Tom said. "Flamel's coming in January. We give it to Flamel." She looked at it one more time and closed her hand around it. "Not to Dumbledore." "Not to Dumbledore," Harry agreed. She put it back in her pocket. She looked at Quirrell on the floor. He was breathing, unconscious but alive, the possession apparently severed by Voldemort's dispersal. "We need to leave before someone arrives," she said. "Dumbledore will be summoned soon if he hasn't been already," Harry said. "We have maybe 10 minutes." Tom was already moving toward the potions room. She stopped at the entrance and looked back at him, and there was something different about how she looked at him, or possibly it was just that he could see it more clearly now. the thing that had been there for 2 years and that they'd both been navigating carefully around and could now simply look at directly. "Harry," she said. "Yeah. The fragment I'm containing," she said. "I need to tell you the permanent solution." "Tell me on the way out," he said. She nodded and turned and walked through, and he followed her, and the mirror stood in the empty room behind them, and if it had any opinion about what it had just shown these two extraordinary children, it kept that opinion to itself in the silent particular way of very old magic that has learned patience. They went back through the rooms, potions, chess, keys, devil's snare, and as they moved Tom explained in a quiet and precise voice what she'd worked out for the fragment, and Harry listened with his characteristic complete attention, and by the time they came up through the trapdoor and past Fluffy's sleeping bulk and out into the third-floor corridor, he'd heard it all and understood it and said yes. Just, yes. She looked at him sidelong in the dark corridor under the invisibility cloak. "You're not going to argue about the risk." "You've already calculated the risk more thoroughly than I can," Harry said. "If you're satisfied with it, I'm satisfied with it. I could be wrong." "You're not wrong often," he said, and gave her words back to her, and she looked at him with the real smile again, and he thought that collecting instances of it was one of the better investments he'd made in his 11 years. They walked back through the dark castle together, under the cloak, the stone in Tom's pocket and the scar on Harry's forehead cold and clean for the first time in his life, and somewhere above them, Albus Dumbledore was already returning to Hogwarts with the careful urgency of a man who had set a stage and was returning to find it impeccably cleared. Not the way he'd planned. But then, nothing was.